But thank you for the follow. Even if I pronounce your name wrong, I apologize. Uh, but oh, okay, we got some. I got a nice group of people here. We got Desperado is here as well. All right, love to see it. Okay, thank you all for being here. Yeah, we were having a good conversation. All Black Everything. We had lots of good conversations, right? So like, yeah, what's your pick? We talked about how we were discussing whether rural towns even have a place in America, right? Whether they should be absorbed into other towns if they're poor, right? And it's like not much bunch of economic activity. Should they just kind of be absorbed? Is it better? Like it would be better for the environment if they were. So maybe we should just do that. Also, I mean, expand into suburbs because we should get rid of the fucking suburbs. So yeah, I was just wondering like, if that should be a
Look,
thing.
I'm just really mad at the hand-holding takes. That was what
That's
triggered me.
honestly, who here is booty touching? Who's going butt to butt? Because we got a problem.
There's a time and a place.
There's a time and a place.
I'm not saying that it's gonna be as universal or as iconic as spooning, okay? But just sometimes it's a nice little medium. It's not as intimate, it's not as much as spooning, but it's still some contact going on.
I literally have no shame. I'll hold hands with anyone. I really don't. It doesn't.
Yeah, but there's a difference between butt touching and hand holding. These are not the same. Let's not equate these two.
Apparently, hand holding is more unacceptable, and I am flabbergasted by the thought of it. Like what?
I don't get it. I don't get it.
Yeah, I don't understand. Like, first of all, is anyone here anti-hand holding? Maybe we got rid of the degenerates. But is anyone here anti-hand holding? Okay, great.
I'll hold hands with everybody. It don't matter. Anyone wants to hold a hand? I got a hand to hold.
Side of the screen right now. Sit, other side.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay, good. Yeah.
Well, you guys are doing that terrible, Bretto. You're holding hands.
Other side. I'm on the side.
Yeah, you're holding hands with nothing. You did
no. The side you were at before. The side you were at before, Desperado. The other side. Desperado. The other side. There we go. Oh my God.
Okay, let's never speak of this again, gang. Like this is okay. I do have some thoughts, some actual thoughts on the absorption of rural towns and also the censorship. I'll always have thoughts on censorship, but the rural town thing is odd to me, especially when you don't give the people of that town that choice. That seems like fundamentally wrong. I wasn't here for the entirety of that portion of the conversation, so maybe I missed the thrust of what everyone was trying to say. But that seems like a fundamental, like, if a community has lived in a place for a long time, and then suddenly another group comes in and just tries to take them over, and force absorb them. No, I think
that's just Tuesday, bro. It's America. Hello.
Yeah, well, I don't like it.
No, I don't like it.
The other thing is that like I was looking at the plant. The plant is for like electric cars and battery construction for cars and whatnot. A lot of batteries have lead in them, so you're going to be bringing a lot of hazardous elements into this community, and then possibly having it leak into the water table, because we all know that for-profit companies are really, really good about cleaning up after themselves, especially if it's more of a cost to the company itself. So I worry about just poisoning the community itself, depending on how close it is to like the water table and whatnot.
I agree. That's one of the things that I brought up during the panel, was that they're going to build this plant. It's going to become a thing, and then they're going to be shafted out of pretty much the majority of the money that's going to come from taxes from the plant, but they're still going to get poisoned with all of the environmental damage from the plant. It's like, that's a double whammy. Like, why would people think that this is like the answer? There are multiple different ways to go about handling that town's financial mishandling, which has nothing to do with the current administration of said town. They're fixing it, and like I said previously, if they really wanted to focus and handle on getting this town of Mason out of debt, then they would have done it long before this plant was brought up. And the only reason it's even being considered is because there's a new thing bringing in a lot of money. That's literally it. And that's it's incomprehensible. It's like, why would you pretend? No, I know why you would pretend. You would literally pretend to give a shit about this town so that you can make the most bang for your people's bucks instead of actually doing something that's beneficial to the community at large.
I think that when you look at rural communities and sort of the hollowing out that occurs, I think one of the sort of biggest problems that goes with this that doesn't get nearly enough attention is the sort of political effect that this has, where we see, rural areas become deeper reds and we see more urban areas become deeper blues. And as a result, people continue to sort of live in communities that essentially start looking like Twitter echo chambers, unironically. And I think that has some can have some really disastrous effects that we really should try and clamp down on. The problem is that, and I think this sort of goes against Wick's point earlier, is that I don't really think anybody's really forcing people to move out of rural areas. It just seems like people really do not want to live in rural areas anymore, especially in America, whether that's a consequence of sort of a concentration of our economic activity or, just the advancement of cities. I don't want rural towns to die out, but I don't know what we do.
You make very good points talking virtual pinata.
Well, thank you, man. I really appreciate it.
The big problem with rural communities, and full disclosure, I've for the last few years lived in a very rural area. There's Mennonites. It's deep rural. I have like 3 neighbors. It's hard to get anything. It's hard. There's no infrastructure here. There's no community building here. It's very, very insulated, very secular, or not secular, but
religious.
they're all
isolated.
Insular and isolated both. And whenever things like the money just doesn't go here. The money just doesn't go here. The school here, the school that the children go to is trash. It's trash. It has nothing. And no one wants to live here because there's no jobs. There's no jobs here. There's no investment into these communities, and it's dying out. Combine that with the opioid crisis we're seeing that is sweeping across Appalachia and a lot of these rural communities, like they're dying. They're, in a very literal way, these small towns are dying, and no one seems to give a shit, and it sucks.
It's hard to care about a place that, is so far removed from the everyday actions of millions of people and like the things that millions and millions of Americans see every day. Because if I'm not mistaken, the large majority of the country are on the coast. And there's less and less density, population density towards the middle of the country. You have your cities here and there, like in I think like Indianapolis might be one of them and stuff, like in the middle of the country where it's like you have your hubs, but for the most part, it's very it's very hard to see it because we're so focused on the next best thing, the next best thing. Also, in that regard, a lot of the cities that are the biggest tend to be left leaning as well. So we definitely don't really consider the redder states, the redder sections of certain states, just because we're so focused on being the next progressive thing and making our place the next better thing and keeping it going and going. We do tend to neglect the places that are falling behind. It's kind of like playing an RTS or like playing Civilization, if anyone's ever played it. You get to a point where some of your cities are doing really well due to their geographic location and the things that they can do and trade, but you tend to leave behind some smaller places because you aren't actually, there's no point in focusing in it if that's not winning the game, in a sense, right? Like, it happens in real life in that sense, in that analogous sense. And it's very common to see, and not just in America, but in all types, every country that ever has any sort of big progress or like industrial boom, right? Like rural places that are farther from central hubs of civilization tend to get left behind.
Yeah. So, yeah, but I think that's absolutely true because we leave them behind because they aren't efficient, right?
Mm-hmm.
That it doesn't make sense. So like I think our city our national planning is disastrous to begin with, right? We had this like Great White Flight that started, and like a lot of people left the cities for this idea of the suburbs as a happier place, right? Rather than making the cities better, right? And all investment flew with them. That's like not to deny, like, you know, how this happened, right? That and this and this was explicitly a racialized movement. It wasn't the only reason people moved, but like it was the reasons were tinged with race. And what do we get? We got like a spread out geographic environment where there are suburbs that have a strong tax base, better schools, and all those things, right? And then they separate the city from the rural, which is farther out, and they usually don't get all those benefits, right? It's kind of like a stratified way of planning things, and these suburbs they don't provide anything special other than like the ability to have a bit more space with your like McMansion, right? With your copy and pasted home. So I think the suburbs are like just completely disastrous.
Yep.
Wait,
And I think
why? In which? Sorry, not to interrupt, but why? Like, what's the disaster?
everything. You want to try it, Flow Trace?
Yes, I would love to.
Mhm.
Suburbs are a disaster for a couple of reasons. I just want to clarify at the start, we don't need to get rid of suburbs, but I think it's the case that American cities have far too many suburbs and rely too many of them. First off, they're a net tax drain. A lot of people don't realize that the way that we make roads in America is that the federal government funds the creation of them, but not the continued maintenance of them. And as a result, suburbs, which tend to have much more roads in terms of the ratio of roads to populations, are just these like black holes that at first seem very good to cities, but then turn into these like monstrous holes in the budget. The other problem with suburbs is that the sort of consequences that they have for designing your city are incredibly disastrous, and this mostly goes to motorways. When you develop a city that that is as wide as is required to sustain a large suburb population, you end up essentially massively disincentivizing things like public transit and massively start requiring things like the apocalyptic parking requirements that American cities have, along with all of the cars that people need. And as a result, it means that kids can't get out and walk around their neighborhoods. Everyone has to own 1 or 2 cars. As a result, there needs to be way more parking, and these problems just quickly compound upon themselves and balloon into all of these different issues.
Okay, well, here's a
Not
question.
to mention, the cars need to be a lot larger and use a lot more gas because you have to travel a farther distance in order to get the things that you need for sustenance.
If all these things you're saying are true, which some of them are, right? Is there anything that does not have some kind of a problem? Someone could list off an equally, possibly, maybe worse, terrible number of things that are wrong with cities. Does that mean we shouldn't have cities?
They could list off problems with cities. No doubt, suburbs have advantages and disadvantages. Cities have advantages and disadvantages. But the current model that American cities have of suburbs is just so clearly a bigger net negative than cities. If we could move more in the direction of having denser cities and less suburban sprawl, it would be an almost unmitigated good. No doubt, we could move in the other direction too far, but we're far from reaching there. Right now, the direction we need to be moving is denser.
I mean, so why do you think people are moving out of the cities? I know, Prime, you're saying there's a racial element. Do you think there's something else? Like, do you think, are they tricked into moving out of cities? Is their life better in cities? Everyone's life better in cities? Are they less happy in the suburbs, or did they all move out of the city because they're not happy and they want to be in the suburbs?
Well, it may not be a racial issue right now, although it probably does play a little bit of it, but you got to, like, COVID just happened, and COVID in cities was not good. New York City particularly, people did not like that shit. The lockdowns were necessary because there were so many people, and being that bunched up with a bunch of people during a pandemic was not appealing. So a lot of people ended up leaving the city. I don't know about other cities across the country, though, because I'm not from those places, but I know from where I'm from, that's largely the reason why people are fleeing New York City.
So even this conversation is just indicative of just how little we care about rural communities. Like, we're talking city suburbs, and like we're just off this rural community entirely. It's just forgotten. Like, they don't fucking exist and they don't fucking matter. And I object to that. I think that, like, there are people here who have lived, that they have a graveyard with their entire family from generations back. They don't want to move. And are we going to be so selfish? Like, these cities are dying. We need to invest something in them. I know it's not cost effective.
All communities matter.
I
not
know it's
just
not.
rural ones.
I understand that as well. Cities, suburbs, they have their problems, they have their benefits. But when we come to rural communities, that's where the pain is for a lot of these people. A lot of people that are getting more and more red because they feel they aren't being listened to. They aren't being listened to, and it's a problem.
So, okay, I'll address that. First of all, shout out to my friend Red Charlotte in chat, who is like losing her mind. She's amazing.
Yeah, but okay, Prime, real quick. She argued to me that there'd never be a war forever in Europe. So yeah, I guess forever ended a couple weeks ago. I just want to point that out.
I don't know anything about that, but shout out to you, Red Charlotte. I hope you're doing well. Crystal Clear Art, another person who I like, says, because you're reference to the suburbs, because you're nearer to bad neighborhoods than you are probably in suburbs, right? So like in a city, you're nearer to bad neighborhoods than you would be in suburbs. Here's the thing, though: why are those neighborhoods bad, right? Like, why are they quote unquote bad in the first place? They're bad because of crime disinvestment. A lot of those neighborhoods, those bad neighborhoods, were white middle class neighborhoods previously, right? But then they fled. Right, they fled the city as soon as it started to get a tiny bit more brown, and then we redlined those districts, right? Those neighborhoods. We kept money out of them. We designed, talking about public transportation, we designed a transportation so that it would avoid those neighborhoods. We made it impossible to live in those neighborhoods. And then it's like, oh yeah, well, I don't want to be anywhere near those places, right? Look at those bad neighborhoods. That's a city thing, right? I guess there's nothing we can do about it except run away. The other thing we could do is just invest in those communities. We could decide we're going to invest in those communities, make those communities livable for everybody, right? To like tamping down crime, give people opportunities, right? So don't turn into those things, right? Like invest in it, like we'd invest in so many other places in America, right? Make it attractive, and then a lot of people come in, right? Like I'm for gentrification if it doesn't like necessarily move out like the people who were there previously, right? But like make it attractive so people want to move in. That's the answer.
It's a very much a vicious cycle, I think, with cities, where the cities become worse in a certain way, which leads to more people leaving, which makes them more worse, and it very quickly spirals out of control.
This is where I would say a push for a massive transit system, like a train system, in which you have trains going from major city to small city and whatnot. Even if the train times are very limited, it doesn't really matter. The fact that you can actually get people to move in and around those areas would make it a heck of a lot easier, not only for these small communities, but possibly even the suburbs and the city at the same time.
That's a good point. I bring up Japan again, which someone mentioned in chat. It's a much smaller country, so obviously they have to be a little bit more efficient with the space that they have. But a transit system, like a train, like a rail system that actually went from like rural parts of the country to cities like more regularly or just more efficiently would be probably the best way to modernize these places. One, the railroads would end up increasing, investment ventures, making people want to invest in those smaller areas because they know they're going to get traffic back and forth with trains at the very least. I mean, people's rent might go up a little bit because that's generally what happens when you put like efficient ways to major city centers right next to places. But I mean, theoretically, their pay should also be going up too because they'd have more like job opportunities at the very least by having a place that they could work that's within range, that doesn't cost them like a whole gallon and a half or a whole tank and a half to get to.
Yeah, well, the other thing is that you can also, when you have like a transit system like that, you can have people where instead of living in the city or living in the suburbs, they have options of places that they can actually move to. And if they decide that they want to move to a small community out in the middle of nowhere or whatnot, and they have that option to take the train into work where they don't have to deal with a commute, like hardly at all and whatnot, that is definitely a viable option for people at basically all income levels. Because if you can go out to this, in essence, rural community via train, and the rent is a lot cheaper, the cost of living is a lot cheaper in that location and whatnot, and you can take the train into work, I think there's a lot of people that would actually take advantage of that.
I 100% agree, but I think this is where sort of our lofty ideas need to hit with reality, which is that for some reason it appears to be the case that in the United States it's really hard to get these things going, and not just for political reasons. I think it's I think it's now somewhat infamous, the high-speed rail project in California that I think like just ballooned like almost like 10x'd its like predicted cost, and in terms of the amount of dollars we had to pay for every mile of track was something like 3 times what other countries were paying. So I think that a lot of us are going to agree on in terms of what we'd like to see happen, but I think we have to be honest that it seems to be a lot harder. And I think and I think the more specifically, how do we fix that? How do we make it so that the next high-speed rail project in America doesn't blow up in our faces like California?
Subsidize it heavily. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong here, but I'm pretty sure the second industrial revolution saw the laying of like all of the United States train tracks. And I don't know how much cheaper it would have been in comparison to like now. Like obviously the money is the inflation and stuff like that, but it happened. How did it happen?
Well, this was a much emptier country. It was a much emptier country, and not as many people had.
I think a more fuller country would be able to produce more.
No. It's like you're. So what he's Mr. Pinata Man Flow Trace is describing. He's describing that like when you lane those tracks for each mile, right? Like you have to go across different property lines. You have to like negotiate with each of them, buy those that land up, right? Some people are not going to want to give their land, and if you really need it, then eminent domain or something, right? So like you're getting tied up in courts. It's a whole thing for each section of it, right? So it's not easy. It's easy to say, well, let's just do it, but the actual realities of doing that now in this day, with like how property is divided in this nation, is actually quite difficult through an urbanized area. It'd probably be easier if we were doing it like across country, because the middle's a lot more empty, right? Across country, but like going up and down the coast is actually very difficult.
Do we think that that the change in how we work with the rise of remote working and things has changed this dynamic at all, or will change it?
I hope
from
not.
cities and
Remote
things?
work needs to be killed. That shit needs to go bye-bye as soon as possible.
Why
I
is
understand,
that?
but
I think that work is one of like the last communal social circles that a lot of Americans engage with, and I think that the shift from in-person communal social circles to massively online ones has been incredibly negative. We can have some online presence, but I think that Americans are too online right now, and God forbid if people aren't even going into the office anymore. I think that we need to get people outside into the real world a lot more than where we are right now.
okay,
That's a
so
bold
what?
statement.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. So do you think that things in social media? This might be a little off topic, so if you don't want to go down this rabbit hole with me, fair enough.
I'll
Do you
follow
think
where
that?
you lead, Wick.
Well, thank you. I don't know if that's a good idea, but
Holding hands, of course.
of course, holding hands as we do so. Uh, So, would you say that the rise of social media, such as Facebook, such as Instagram, such as Twitter, such as Twitch, do you think that one of the harms it has done is help to atomize us and help to kind of keep us from the communal aspects that we once had, the having friends over for dinner or going to board game night or what have you? Do you think that had an appreciable effect on that?
Partially, yes. I would say that that's not my biggest problem with social media, and I think that social media contributes to that problem, but it's not necessarily the biggest factor.
Okay, what would you say the
But
biggest
overall,
factor
yes.
is?
I think that I don't know what it is, but I think there is more to the seeming antagonism that there exists now between groups in America than just the online component. I think there's a lot that plays into it. I was talking earlier, I want to say in the Erudite Discord, about how it feels like the Western psyche, and particularly the American psyche, has been permanently poisoned by the Iraq and Afghanistan wars and the 2008-2009 financial crisis. My honest answer is I don't know. I think that social media is a big part, but I know there are others. I don't know what they are, though.
Okay, that was just my question there.
Do you
Yeah, no
guys
problem.
agree with this on remote work? Because I think it's
I
No,
don't like
no.
remote work for a couple reasons. I think that I think it's unhealthy. Like there is a lot to be said about leaving your work at work and keeping your home stuff at home and not mixing the two. And when we mix the two, like remote work tends to do, it can have some unintended consequences that do become harmful.
You
That
sound like
said,
middle management. But go ahead.
that said, well, yeah, I'm a middle-aged man. So, that said, I do not think that there is a. I do love not having to commute, not having to drive for 30 minutes to get to a workplace. That is awesome. But overall, I don't know. I'm wishy-washy on this. I can be convinced either way on the remote work. So sell me, gang.
Fucking centrist to the end.
I mean,
Let's.
I'm just wondering, what is it like productivity issues is what I'm really like into with this. Exactly, like what kind of work is your boss giving you, and like the amount of time you literally have to spend at the office. So if your boss is literally giving you 4 hours of work to spread over an 8-hour day, personally, I would rather finish all that 4 hours of work and have the extra 4 hours left over to do what I want, which I could do if I was working at home. The thing is that like the problem with being in an office is that not only does it affect your productivity with like the number of people around you and whatnot that also affect how productive you can be. It's not only that, it's the fact that you also have meetings, emails, and all of this other stuff that you have to go through at the office and have to stay that full 8 hours to the very end in order to to complete a day's work. Where if what you are being tasked to complete can be completed in less time than that 8 hours, but you're still being paid the same, I think that's a fantastic idea.
I mean, it's okay. Like, it does sort of get spooky when, you know, like Flow Trace. I don't want to keep calling you VTuber Pinata Man.
That's okay. I appreciate that.
What Flow Trace is saying about just having a very negative effect on the social aspect that humans, especially in America, face, where there's not a lot of social interaction if most people are working at home. When you're an adult, where do you really go to meet people, like, or to just communicate with people in a communal sense, if not like a bar? What if you're not really into that scene though, right? Like, what if that's like a very niche sort of scene? What if you're not into that, like that type of establishment? The only real place that you'd be able to communicate with people in actual real physical life would be at work, which is really important to a lot of people. I mean, anecdotally, I at one point had a remote job, and at first, I'm like, oh yeah, it's gonna be fucking awesome. Sit here on my computer, I got 3 monitors, I'm gonna play video games, and I'm gonna be talking on the phone and stuff. I'm like, yeah, it's gonna be rad. And then I'm like, I kind of have to sit at my computer, which has all of the things that I love and want at a fingertip, but I can't really engage in them. And now I have to sit here in my house for 8 hours doing something that I really don't like doing. And then afterwards, I'm like, oh, I'm so fatigued. Do I sit at my computer for another 4 hours playing video games?
When you put it that way, Jamali, is that how you say your name, Jamali?
Yeah.
Okay. It reminds me of the old Greek story of Tantalus, where he has the water right here and the fruit dangling in front of him, and every time he tries to reach for it, he just can't get it. It's so close. So it sounds like torture. It sounds like a fucking Greek hell.
Yeah.
Is what it sounds like. And no, that's a very good point. It's having so much of your work time just at your home. Again, like it wears on you, because people will think you're always at work because, well, you're just at home, so I can call you at any time. I can feel free to give you a ring even during non-business hours because you just work from home. And that and on the other end, family members and stuff say, oh, well, you're home, so you can help me with this project or that other project. And you're like, no, I'm busy working. But I don't think we're ready for it yet. I just don't think we are as a society. So you and Flowtrace are kind of convincing me here. I'm being persuaded.
Yeah, if I can just...
I don't know.
Sorry, go ahead, Brent.
Okay, I was just gonna say, I think there's plenty of things that can be done from home that people don't need to. It's just like there's things that maybe were considered to be professions and you had to travel for them, but in reality they can be professions and you can be paid, but you don't need to come into the office. And I think it's just sort of like a reevaluation of what's of what's necessary. And I think it's just changed people's minds. I don't think there's certainly things bad about it, but it's gonna have its own negatives. But that doesn't mean that, like, I don't think everybody going into the office for things that weren't exactly necessary was some great, I don't know, some great good or better system. There will be bad things, but I think that it will lead to a lot better outcomes in some ways.
So, to a question for you then, Brento Box, where would we get our social interaction in today's age then, if not work?
I don't know. You can still do work in other ways if you want, and you can still go into the office if you want to work that way. But having it be the requirement, I think, or an expectation, I don't think that's necessary or reasonable anymore. You might still, go in, but you don't have to.
Yeah, and there's the edgelords that'll say like, I don't want to meet people. I don't want to talk to people anymore. Like, okay, dude, you're not the majority of people. I think a lot of people kind of need social interaction, and I like there are other places to do that, but there's no places that are more socially less awkward than at work. Like, sure, you could go to places like public places like a gym or something, right? But like, do you really want to meet someone at a gym?
If someone tries to socialize with me while I'm at the gym,
Yeah,
I tell them to fuck off. I'm at the gym to do gym shit. I don't want to talk about your fucking problems.
And I feel like as an adult, I just feel weird about being in the mall, like hanging out in the mall as an adult. I just feel, because I know that's a place
Malls
for
what's a
mall.
Mall, yeah, right. Malls are something.
I just feel like that's weird as an adult to hang out in the mall. Like,
all right,
go to the mall to buy something and get out. Like,
my audience members, I apologize for letting this 1980s time traveler onto my show. So like, I think it's one. I'm actually honestly surprised that Wick takes this stand. Wick's like a honestly nice person, like a genuinely nice person, and to hear him say that, actually, that like don't talk to him at the gym, actually that surprises me. I would feel like you'd be open for.
I will be polite about it.
No, but polite when I tell you to fuck off.
I'm telling you, I don't like. I will not use those words, but like when nothing annoys me more. Like you've interacted me in social settings.
Yeah.
PrimeCayes. That's the only interactions we've had is in social settings where I'm here to socialize. But when I'm doing another task, when I'm working, when I'm like doing something, and my concentration is needed, and I need my concentration to work out, or I get distracted super easily and I just don't do it, or I just fuck around. So I need that time. So yeah, I get a little annoyed. Also, when I'm trapped in line or something at a fucking grocery store, don't try to strike up a conversation with me, please. Like, I'm trapped. I can't get away. I need to be in this line, but I don't want to hear about your problems. Like, I just don't. I'm sorry.
So I wanted to address, before we'll let you all back in, I want to address Doobie. All right, Doobie, I'm going to be one of those head-ass people you're talking about in chat, right? Like, I have trouble, like, figuring out where to socialize with adults, right? Like, well, exactly. I don't know who first brought that up, but I have that trouble. I'm not a bar person, right? People say, "Well, go to the bar." I don't drink. We've talked about that already on the stream. I don't drink, and like go to like I've been to the gym. Oh, Kamikaze's here. That's great. I've been to the gym, but like people don't tend to want to socialize. Like, what? There are a bunch of wicks there, right? And they're really fucking. People don't want to really be approached. Like, you can say a few things to them, right? But then, like, it's even worse. You know those situations where like you say something to a person, right? Like once or twice, and then like after that you feel obligated to like head nod to them every time afterwards. I'm like, I don't want to get in that situation.
You did the this thing though.
Yeah. It's like, but like we're probably never going to speak again in our lives, but we just feel obligated to do that for forever. But like, yeah, I don't know where to find like deep friendships. I do a remote job. This thing, right? Like I do a remote job. I don't talk to my socialization is this. I don't talk to people after this, right? I sit in my room. I sit in this dark room, and I and I wait patiently until it's time to go live again. That's all I do, right? So like I'm one of those people who has like a lot of trouble figuring out. It's not like I'm not a social person. I think you guys know at least I'm a social person. I like doing that stuff, but it's harder for that. In my area, it's difficult. I've looked into like, you know, those adult groups, like Duba suggested that, like the interest groups, but like I live in a city. There's another city that is much bigger where all of that seems to be focused, right? Like all the things I'd want to join is in this other city, not my city.
Yo, in Doobie, I'm in a rural area surrounded by Mennonites. They don't go on the internet. Like, I can't meet up with them. If I want to meet up with someone, I have to drive like 2 hours. It sucks.
And on the topic of remote work, it does. Someone in my chat didn't bring it up. My mod brought it up. It's like it does help disabled or chronically ill people to have a job, because then they don't have to worry about commuting, transporting it, and all that other stuff. So that is also a benefit of remote work, but that's a small portion of the population. So.
See, I would say that, like, with the amount of time that I've actually spent at work doing office stuff, and if I go and try and recall every meeting that I went to, I would say that there was probably about 10 to 15% of those meetings were actually legitimate. And nothing infuriates me more than being stuck in a place where I can't finish work that I need to get done for that day, for 30 minutes to 45 minutes to have a meeting about something that most likely should have been an email. It totally eats into my productivity.
That's a separate problem though, right? Like,
yes and no. It is a separate problem insofar as it could theoretically be solved by other things, but it is true that working remote does have great benefits, things like that. As the OG remote work hater here, if I could...
Kamikaze, we're getting background noise from you. Sorry, go ahead, please, full trace.
No problem. As the OG remote work hater here, I would like to set a couple of things straight. I think that some amount of remote work is okay. I think that's actually an incredibly good example, Jamali, that you brought up, and or that your mod brought up. Disabled people or chronically ill people, those are the people we should be making exceptions for. And I think even normal people, we can have some level of remote work. But what I'm specifically against is the idea of this mass transition, huge amounts of people working remotely. I'm going to make the argument, and you would normally never catch me dead making this argument, because I am a based neoliberal capitalist, but there is more to our society than line goes up. That is true that economic development can give us great benefits that can tangibly improve our lives. But there is something more to our lives than humans are social creatures, and there's more to our lives than our economic benefit. And when you are seeing a sort of hollowing out of the social lives of young people, in contrast to the greater economic status, I think that is where I start to get concerned. I do think that remote work would be a lot more economically efficient, and I can envision a potential society that we could live in, a realistic society that we could live in, where we could sort of address these problems, where people were going out and meeting people, and people were having these social circles outside of work. But as it stands right now, we are so far to the other side, where young people are getting more and more socially isolated, people are dating less, people are having friends less, they're going out and doing activities less, and in this scenario, I do not think it is a good idea to start massively transitioning people away from one of the last major social circles that they have. If there are other solutions that people have in mind to like get people outside and get people doing things, I'm down for those. But as it stands right now, like we gotta pump the brakes here a little bit, because like I feel like we are legitimately like teetering on like the edge of like just this huge death of the social welfare of our people, of our society. And I think that when you look at like young people and you see how like it feels like every month you'll hear like some ungodly statistic about how like young men, like they're like 30% of them like haven't like ever been in a relationship, or like 40% of them like haven't like had sex in like 5 years. And it's like, humans are social creatures. Like there's a reason why solitary confinement is like a devastating punishment in prisons. And I don't think continually isolating people from real physical contact and hoping that online interactions are going to be able to pick the slack when it obviously is the case that they aren't is a good idea.
I think to add to that point, especially young people, are learning how to socialize through the internet, and that is going to have a really bad consequence. I see it happen where in the limited interaction, again, because I live in a rural area and taking care of some family
And you're
members
an
right
old
now.
person. Yeah. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
yeah, and I'm an old person, but when I
Yeah.
do have interactions with younger people and things like that, the way they socialize, it is clear to me that they've learned it from the internet, and it's not good, gang. It's not good. They're, it's bleeding over, and I don't want Twitter in my real life. Twitter can stay in Twitter. I don't want that shit when I'm not on Twitter. So yeah, I'm 100% with you, Blowtrace.
Sounded an awful lot like boomers screaming at get those kids off my lawn, you know?
No, teach those kids how to socialize like human beings and not like anonymous bits of text on the internet.
Hooligans.
Kamikaze, I want to hear from you. Kamikaze, it's nice to have you here, and not simply yelling at me as I'm playing Elden Ring incorrectly. All right, so Kamikaze, buddy, please, I'd love to hear what you have to say.
I just think it's funny because usually when I'm on these panels, there's the modern takes, but what I hear is boomer take. I don't remember. But anyways, so here's the thing. Anytime there's a major technological change, any type of change, we always notice one issue. It's finding paradigm shifts, I think you would say. Basically, how do you convert this? Because you get mobility. If we can fix insurance, that means you can live anywhere in the United States you want and work if remote work becomes common. With AI, guess what? All the work's going to be tech. I can go blend coffee right now on my computer if I push up a couple buttons, send it to So you can do almost anything remote. This is going to improve people's lives, period. It's improved my life vastly. I know we have scope creep. People talk about scope creep, the way your job encroaches now that you work from home into your personal life. This does happen to everybody. It's almost like you're working 24/7. But it's going to offset. But if we go, let's all allow remote work, then let's take that shit back and reduce it. What you're doing is you're giving companies more power. So people are actually getting a lot more power from the remote work. If you look up stats, people are happier, people prefer it. The stats are in the favor of it, not against it. Your ability not to find social interaction is kind of your problem. And I'm not trying to be a dick, but find a hobby. I have 4 hobbies.
It's not my problem because I'm unemployed. GigaChat.
Oh, well, I'm talking about.
I don't have any problem with remote work preventing me from finding friends.
I'm not saying it's hard, but workplaces will adapt. So say they'll start doing more social opportunities and more things will pop up because this problem will be more recognized. But if we go backwards, it means you have less mobility. And this fixes urban sprawl and all these other worries you guys have. If people are able to work in non-suburban areas, like more farmland kind of areas, they can spread.
But Kamikaze, not all jobs are able to be done remotely, so that just creates this kind of class imbalance almost, right? Like,
I mean, all jobs are like that. All jobs are like that. Doctors have to work 30 plus hours because they have to do 20-hour surgeries. Freaking Big Mac flippers have to deal with grease burns all day. Every job has. I just feel like that.
Unrelated to this, someone in chat said you guys sounded like you legitimately. I looked away from my screen and I thought you were having a conversation with yourself for a second. I'm not even gonna lie.
Oh shit, maybe. I don't know.
Wick and Kamikaze?
Yeah, they actually do sound alike.
No shot.
I don't
Yeah.
think so. Especially
Close
the mic
your
quality
eyes
is
and
different.
listen. Wait. Close your eyes and then one of you speak and then we'll see who it is.
Okay.
Okay, who's closing their eyes? Everyone close their eyes?
Everyone close their eyes.
My eyes are closed.
I'm not looking. I'm just looking.
Now, one of you say something. Like something informative.
Okay, guys, are your eyes closed?
That's
Yeah.
Kamikaze.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
obviously Kamikaze. Like,
What do you think now?
It's
That's
obviously Wick. It's like,
Okay, yeah,
you
well,
guys
apparently-
sound completely different.
I honestly, legitimately couldn't tell. I was about to say
That's
this
pretty
one.
racist of you. Pretty racist of you. All white people don't sound the same. All white people don't sound the same, right? They're individuals, right? They have their own uniqueness to them. Don't take that other individuality away from them, all right? People always don't try and do that to the white man. Say there's all the same, all right?
Oh,
Brancho,
man.
you're a
brother
unique
Brian.
person,
Thank
Brancho, and we love you for you.
No, it's okay. Like, I get it. I can see how you would think that. Prime's just spent a lot of time around me, so he knows my inflections and knows, my
Oh God,
the
yeah,
tenor
I
of my
need
voice.
better friends. Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. Like in remote work,
This
then.
is like when we're talking about how the internet is hurting people's abilities, like Prime has to be friends with me. So just, keep that in mind. Pro or con, you decide.
So
Here's
this
the
sounds
deal.
like an This sounds like an argument for Herodotus more than anything to me. The what is it? The Greek philosopher that basically was one of the first people to say that the young people are stupid, and that what is it? They should follow the old ways of how things used to be, and not modernize with the times as they are. I feel like this is kind of like one of those arguments in which we're basically saying the young people need to be more like us so that they
No.
can be in the golden
It's
age.
just recognizing the dangers of technological advancement. Like, yes, there's benefits. Yes, there's pros. But if we just act like it's all Gucci and all good and all gravy and not realize that it is actually causing harm in certain circles and certain societies and don't take measures to prevent that or reduce it, I think that's foolish.
Yeah, I think the key is that I can imagine a society where we tackle these problems, but it feels like we are moving further along this scale without ever sort of stopping and trying to address those problems. Like, it feels like we're putting the factories up next to like the schoolyards before we like figure out a good way to tackle pollution or stuff like that. I'm not opposed to remote working in principle, but I think that in our society right now, massively shifting towards remote working is a really bad idea. I do agree that there is probably a way to adapt it. You know, the thing I always say about social media is that if social media was like cars, we would be in the stage where we don't have seatbelts or airbags yet. Like we
Like the
can
movie
like,
cars?
No, no, like the physical cars. And I think it'll also really help the fact that kids are now being raised by parents who themselves grew up with social media. I think we can get better at these things, but I think there needs to be sort of an acknowledgement that we are going to get better at these things, but that's going to require time. And in the meantime, maybe it's not the best idea to just hurtle down the pathway of like shifting almost the entirety of our lives and our social presence onto the online realm, because I feel like that has a bunch of really negative externalities that we're not yet ready for. I think that people are going to like it more and prefer it more, but I think that we need to acknowledge that while people are rational actors, they're not perfectly rational, and people are oftentimes going to choose things that might be good for them in the short term but bad for them in the long term. I think like we all know what it's like to have like a bad stint on social media, and some people can't stop themselves from doom scrolling. Some people can't stop themselves from being way too online in a way that is legitimately very unhealthy for them, because these things are hardwired like borderline drugs to give us that dopamine rush, so that, you know, when you see the alerts on social media platforms, you get like that rush. And as long as that's the case and we still as a society haven't, you know, come up with the seatbelt or the airbag, then I think maybe we should just slow down a little bit.
Jesus, Dewey, that avatar should be illegal.
That's awesome.
That avatar is my spirit animal. It's beautiful.
It's so cute.
I have many versions of it.
Hate it.
Yeah, he does. He's got a lot, actually. But all right, we got a few new people here, and I want to hear what y'all have to say. I think this is like a super interesting. Our opinions here. So Dustin / Redheaded Man, thank you for being here. Hey, are you Irish, Dustin?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, great.
All right, that was a
So
little
I wanted I wanted to congratulate him and his people for their accomplishments on.
Like what?
Okay,
Turning the Boston
for
River
being awesome, for kicking ass and taking names. That's what.
Freaking British ass and taking names. Yeah, I got you. Thanks. Good looking out. Appreciate it. Hopefully the IRA does not fucking come back in this day and age. We will see.
But anyway, yeah. What do you? What's your thoughts on like remote work or the suburbs or anything else we've been talking about?
Yeah, I love this idea as far as like remote work goes. I think you have to end up doing it a lot like. I think you need obviously a managed social change, and then you need a responsive government. As far as like the idea of like, okay, if we're gonna make the electric car transition, one, you got to start laying groundwork heavy. You need to start working on power grids. You need to start being a little bit more efficient. And I look at that same example here. As far as like remote work goes, I really love this idea. It allows people more time, a more effective way to spend their time, and a more effective way to start spending time with their children. I think that's going to be a huge plus if we can get there. Obviously, we're going to have our quality issues and start to figure out how what jobs we can do remotely, and then what are we going to do to work on some issues as far as like the real manual labor part and how we're going to start valuing that. I love this idea from a societal standpoint, from a governance standpoint. It gets people a little bit more in their homes to but to deny like a social issue is a little bit silly. Like we do need to figure out like how we're gonna meet people, how we choose to interact with one another, and that's something I think that you can do with some add-on programs like community service, things like that. But it's really gonna be a huge thing to tackle. But like I said, as far as like even property management, you got to look at this from like a corporation standpoint. Like if you can lessen your chances of like big mistakes or sexual harassment lawsuits, making sure you don't have any culpability right there because everybody's working at home, so they have minimal.
smaller
Yeah, you
harassment.
can't sexually harass someone over the internet. That's just not.
Well,
how
you're less
less
likely to.
Oh, it's harder.
Yeah, and it becomes harder.
Certainly.
Is it? Like, is it?
I
well,
think it is.
from a business.
It is in a
standpoint,
work.
yeah,
It
I
is in a
think-
work because there's gonna be a
yeah.
paper trail there. There's no paper
Right,
trail for like the
exactly.
thing you say under
So-
your breath when you pass someone. But like if it's
Right.
all on Slack, then like I actually do believe that.
Mhm. I am
So-
not saying this eliminates sexual harassment, Wick, you putz. I'm saying it makes it a little less likely.
I don't
Heart
know.
attack
Like,
on Wick. Yeah, putts.
I don't know.
Kamikaze, then we'll go to Doobie.
So I will say there are caveats with this. I do agree. One of the things is only 65% per Stanford of Americans have internet fast enough to handle video calls. That is why, but that's why we need to push it out. If more companies are doing it, they will actually have a reason to increase bandwidth, and they can stop trying to screw people over. This is why I say pushing forward is always the better route with this stuff because it's going to give us. There's always going to be problems. We have social problems now because of social media. What's the difference? It's hybrid models are currently. I guess everybody here would agree hybrid models are great, right?
Depends what the
Hybrid
model is.
model of
Both ways.
as far
Of
as
like internet.
allowing-
I think you mean that centrism is the answer, and which I wholeheartedly agree.
consider myself an extreme moderate.
Let's go. Let's go to Doobie, who has a different take from all the rest of you broke motherfuckers. So Doobie, please.
Yeah, so I think the work from home thing is actually pretty good, generally. Now, from my perspective as an employer, it's good for lots of reasons we could get into. One of them is what Mr. Redhead just like tapped on, the sexual harassment thing. I am fucking terrified of sexual harassment lawsuits in my workplace. I need to worry about that a lot less with people working from home. Very simple. But I think even from the employee perspective, I think if we're honest, most of the time when you're working from home, you're on YouTube at the same time. You're wearing your fucking boxers. If you're wearing anything at all, you got a fucking beer next to you. You're just hanging out, doing what you got to do to make some money while you're semi enjoying yourself on the side, watching YouTube videos or listening to an audiobook or yelling at your kids or whatever the fuck you want to do, right? So that environment, I think, is way more comfortable for most people than having to, put on your fucking button-up shirt and go into the office and pretend you like people all day, right? I think from the employee perspective, that's pretty fucking good. And so long as you stay productive, right? I think there's not much for the employers to complain about. So
Property value too. Like you don't have to buy an office space,
Yeah.
right?
yeah,
Yep.
save a fucking shit ton of money in office space. But I think beyond that, this idea that like, where are we gonna meet people if not for the workplace is fucking crazy to me. Because first off, the workplace isn't really supposed to be a socializing kind of situation, right? You're supposed to work, right? And if you're the kind of person who socializes at the workplace and is there to meet friends and shit, maybe that's why you have all these issues and you're broke right now, okay? You shouldn't be doing that shit, right? If you're at work, you work. It's very simple. If you want to go do shit after work, you go do shit after work, right? But any of those things you could do with a remote work,
Spoken like
remote
a real
work thing.
employer.
Yeah.
But
Oh wait, hold on. I'm almost done. And like you could, if you look, there's tons of shit out there. You could fucking join a yoga class. Some of you are religious, go to church more, get involved with that. Volunteer. You're fucking lefties, right? Go volunteer to make the world more green or whatever the fuck you people do, right? I think this idea that like, oh God, where are we gonna find friends? If not, not among the other worker bees, that are grinding away beside us. It's fucking silly, right? Like it's just dumb. Like, be honest.
so
Let's go to
I
flow
was
trace
gonna
and
say
then
this is gonna be the This is the first time that I'm going to say this. I 100% agree with Duke.
That's not good for you. I will go to Flo, Chase, and Wick.
I can agree with a lot of sort of your descriptive claims, Doobie, but I think when you get into the details and sort of the net question, that's what sort of becomes a much bigger problem where I would disagree with you. Most people who work from home are on YouTube wearing boxers, got a beer, hanging out. They're not just at work doing work, like you say in the actual workplace. The reality is that you do lots of things at the workplace, and even just interacting with people, cooperatively working on tasks in work is a form of socialization. Socialization doesn't have to be, sitting down and playing D&D. Just being around people, that can be socialization, and having those consistent kinds of relationships that you have with people at work is absolutely a form of socialization. If you look at prisons, solitary confinement, it's not as if you're having all these wonderful friends in prison, but that's still seen as a punishment, because just being part of a community, being part of seeing the same faces is a great benefit to people, especially in person. It is true that people are going to stay more productive and that people are way more comfortable, but if I can cross-apply the last time we were on that Prime panel talking about verbal harassment, people need to go through some amount of adversity. Life should not be entirely comfortable. There should be some times where it's like, oh man, I'm going to have to go into work and give a presentation, that's going to be tough, and you're going to be better for it. We should not be giving into this idea that life should become a pillow fort where you just live and never have any sort of comfortability. On the last point, it's just go outside, forehead. Like, I wish people would do that, but they don't. I do agree it's a very easy thing, but regardless of what the reason is, people aren't doing that. If you look at young people, they're becoming more and more social incels, unironically. And as long as that's going to be happening, we can't just look at them and say, oh, why don't you just go outside? Like, it's the equivalent of telling a homeless person to just take it alone and learn JavaScript and start doing and sign up for contract jobs. Like, whether or not we think people should be able to do it, they can't do it, and that's the fundamental issue.
I have to say,
respond.
Flow Trace, I gotta say, I don't know you as a person or anything, but I really, really, really respect your ability to very passionately say a bunch of dumb shit, and just get through it. It's really impressive.
I know.
So this kind of thing where you have a community in the workplace, right? And these end up being your peers, and you working on a project together, so you form attachments with each other, yada yada. That's all true, of course. But you could get some of that same shit through the Zoom calls that you're on, that you guys were just complaining about, right? With those people, if you're having those Zoom calls all the time. But I wouldn't recommend that, even because having friends in the workplace is really rocky in the first place, because when those friendships break up, you still got to go and talk to those people every fucking day and pretend you like them, right? Because you're making money there. So just avoid the situation entirely, right? Make friends somewhere else. Go to church. Go to a yoga class. Learn how to dance. Do some salsa, whatever the fuck. Go to a concert. Go to the park. Do any of these other things that you could do to find people with similar interests, separate from work, right? Where you can have those same attachments, same long-term connections with people. I don't understand why you feel the need to build a community around grinding away at these gears to make some money. It seems really silly.
So the problem with what you're saying, Doobie, is that a lot of people, that is their only social time when they're at home and not working. It's not like they have time to relax and do other things. They're busy taking care of their kids. They're busy working on other projects. Some of them have second jobs. For many people in America, the workplace, this place they spend 8 to 12 hours a day, is the only place they have actual human contact and are busy taking care of housework, busy taking care of their kids, busy taking care of other projects. It is their one time and their sole ability to socialize with people their own age. Now, this also, again, you say, well, just do it online. Online is different. It is fundamental. How we interact online is fundamentally different than how we act in person. And we lose something when we just work from home, when we lack that in-person social interaction. So as I said, for a lot of people, it's the only place they have, because it's the only time they have.
So we'll go to Doobie, Jamali, and Desperado, Kamikaze, Flow Trace.
So here's the implication of what you're saying, right? So first off, this person you're speaking of just really hates their fucking kids and wants to get away from them. Understandable, right? You don't want to be around your fucking kids all day. I get it. You want to be around other adults who, without screaming kids in the background. Totally reasonable thing to want. Babysitters exist, right? Get a babysitter, use a family member, maybe go and do any of those things that I just mentioned. Tell your wife or your girlfriend, hey, I'm going to go out today to do this thing with these guys. Here's where I'm going to be. Take care of the kid. It's not, you're speaking as if you're grinding away 20 hours a day at your desk at home, right, with a screaming kid in the background trying to make this money. You squeeze in 4 hours of sleep, and then you just go back to the computer and grind away again because you're just slaving away for the man, right? That's not how that's not the situation.
That's
People
what it's
do
like for
have
Prime.
some
Please subscribe, guys. Show them some
people
support.
do have some free time, right? Generally, people have
Not
free
a
time.
lot
They
less
spend
than you
playing
would
video
think
games or
in a
whatever
lot
the
of
fuck, right?
cases.
So even if it's an hour a day, right? If you can squeeze out a few hours on the weekend, that's good, right? Maybe you can invite your friends over while your kid's screaming in the background to hang out with you while you're semi-working, watching YouTube videos or whatever the fuck you guys do, right? So like just this implication, right, that you're like this like slave or something, right? Just attached to this machine, and you need to keep your eyes on it. You can't do shit else, right? The only piece you get from your screaming kid is at the office place, because there, even though you're still slaving away this machine, there are other people next to you slaving away, and you can speak to them now and then when the guard isn't looking, right? It's like you're painting this picture of work that's like really silly.
No,
think you just
it's
said
really
some stuff-
accurate. Oh, go on.
I think you just said something that was, one, extremely exaggerated, and two, like it just seems so disconnected. And maybe it is because you're an employer. I was joking earlier when I was just speaking like an employer, but maybe it is because you are. I don't know your life. I don't know who you are. I don't know if you like came up from like the dirt and worked your way to owning a business. You probably did, but you're saying that you shouldn't be socializing at work in the first place, but you should be socializing with your friends while you're at home working. Like, wouldn't that be worse because your friend isn't even working the same job? That doesn't make sense. If you don't want people to socialize at a physical workplace because they should be working, why would you want them to socialize while they're working from home?
Well, to be clear, I don't. Right, I think it's stupid to be socializing while you're working. But if the Wick's contention, right, his situation is that he can only socialize while he's working, right? Then hey, bring one of your friends over while you're working from home, because we all know that when you're working from home, you're not working all the time, right? And that's okay, right? So bring one of your friends over, have them hang out on the couch and drink some beer and get some shit chat while you're like quote unquote working.
Okay.
Like,
And
if it's that bad, right? But I don't think that's the case.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say, because I'm gonna head out because it's 1:00, but the last thing I'll say is that working from home isn't like, I'm not saying that it's necessarily the worst possible thing for society, but it is generally bad for society as we are now as a whole. And we can see this by the fact that people are being less used to socializing in a more physical manner than previously. And I'm not saying that we need to necessarily go back to socializing before the internet. I think that moving forward, we could probably learn to socialize with the internet involved and have it be a healthy, more, I think we can all agree, more respectable, engageable way that doesn't necessarily just rely on shitty memes that you saw on TikTok and just regurgitating that, especially as an adult. We're not kids. If we were kids and we were teenagers, maybe, yeah, sure, I could see that happening. But as an adult, you generally want to be able to have a conversation with someone that's about a little bit more than just like the next trend that you guys have picked up on the internet. Meeting people and interacting with people at a physical workplace not only allows, I think, generally increases productivity, because when you work with people that you like, you are more likely to be more productive because you're having a better time going into work. No one wants to go into work and be like, oh, I fucking hate my fucking coworkers, man. Oh, I'm gonna be the most productive. That doesn't happen, okay? People aren't more productive when they hate their coworkers. That's just not from my experience that I've seen working with people, right? There needs to be a place for people to meet, and that is also like sort of like a school environment, right? Like, the reason why growing up in like school and you're interacting with people, you're forced to go and interact with people. And then after that, you can choose whatever you want to do afterwards, interact with whoever you want to, and so forth and so on. And work sort of fits that gap. So after college, you tend to realize that you have nowhere to go to meet people unless you're going to select places like a bar or maybe the mall or maybe the gym. But like I said, I don't think a lot of people like being interacted with in some of those places. So if that's not where you're going to get that interaction and all you are working from is home, you essentially have put yourself into a place where you need to get on a dating app or get on whatever. I think you posted the link of like letsmeet.com or something, whatever the fuck that was. God knows.
Meetup.com. Okay, it was
Yeah,
a great website. I went in there after I broke with my ex forever ago. Met some furries, met some actual vampires. Did a drum circle with some witches. Really cool fucking thing. Okay, it's weird, weird as fuck, but cool. These things exist.
That is genuinely kind of cool. I'm not even gonna hold you to that. I'm not even gonna hold you. That's genuinely kind of cool. You can meet people, especially in niche communities like that. But that ain't for everyone. And most people aren't like that. That's a small community of people. And I think that you'll have a better time. People would have a better time just meeting people and having fun and having the chance of meeting friends and being friends with people that they work with. Because one, working together with someone builds cooperative tendencies, which is always good. And then when you're cooperative with someone, you tend to like them more and so forth. And so it's like a cycle. It happens. It goes into itself, at least from my experience, from what I've seen. But yeah, that's pretty much it. If you want to respond before I leave,
Wait, to be clear, chat. I mean, like actual. They were drinking like actual blood. They were biting each other and shit. Not like killing each other, but there's actual blood involved. And to be clear, I sought out the weird shit on purpose. Right? I was curious. I wanted to see what these people were actually up to, and that's what I did. So it's not all furries and vampires. I promise. So I think that I don't know. I think. Again, this idea that like we have nowhere to socialize as adults, and when as an adult you're free as fuck.
I didn't say that. I said some of the places just aren't as appealing to a lot of people, like bars or clubs.
Well, then if you're just antisocial, you got to see a therapist or something, right? There are tons of places, right? You go to like a yoga class, get a hobby, like do something.
You're trying to say.
Do something that isn't work in staring at YouTube and TikTok videos, okay? Or arguing with people on the internet. I love arguing with people on the internet, but if you're having issues with socializing and you feel like you're not socializing enough, there's tons of other shit you could be doing, right? There's a lot. Like I can give you a list of things you can look up, and you'll probably find some video in your area. It might be interesting.
What you're talking about is not necessarily what I'm talking about. Is not necessarily being asocial to the point where you don't want to even interact with people, because obviously, and what I'm talking about. Interacting with people would be done and ideally done in a workplace so that you don't have to go out and search for these things, because there's a lot that goes into actually going out and searching for a place to meet.
Yeah, you're a grown-ass adult. You got to do grown-ass adult things. You got to go out and meet people if you don't have friends. That's what you do. Okay,
yeah, that doesn't
having
make you
friendships in the workplace.
It just means you don't
having
want to
friendships in the workplace
meet
is
someone
like
in a specific area instead of having some place where you would be required to go.
Well, I guess like part of
having friendships in a workplace is convenient sometimes, but if you end up fighting within the friend group, which happens all the fucking time, you still got to work with these fucking people, and it can make your life very difficult, right? So avoid it entirely.
Yeah, so it just seems to work better, at least the idea of working from home, as I picture it, right? It seems that it would work out better if people would just pursue their own individual interests, like most people will end up doing, right? I think there have been a bunch of people that have worked from home that were starting to be like, okay, I've got so much fucking time. What do I end up doing here? And then they actually start to go out and start to learn about what they actually like without having to worry about, from the business administration standpoint of like, how am I going to do with this? How do I deal with these fucking tensions that develop outside of camaraderie?
All right, fuck everyone else. What about the specific group of people known as gamers, okay? Gamers aren't going outside, all right?
Well, that's fine.
Unless they have to work.
Yeah, sure, because that's fine, because their medium, their source of enjoyment is fucking on this fucking thing, right? Like,
yeah, but it's unhealthy.
Okay, well, that's why.
Well, then they got to game less and go outside. Like, what the fuck?
Well, yeah, okay. Now we're getting to like the boomer.
Well, do you want businesses managing fucking gamers? Like, I don't understand.
I'd rather have the businesses managing them than the gamers. I'll put it that way.
Right. Well, if you look at a lot of gaming professional organizations, like they have workout programs specifically for their athletes. Like this happens.
Okay.
That's a great
when
point.
we say gamers,
you should
we're
have
not
to work
talking...
out at your job. There should be like a gym. I agree.
When we say gamers, we're not talking about esports. We're talking about people whose entire like hobby is gaming. They're not professionals in any way, shape, or form. And the only social interaction they get is when they go out into the workplace. And this hopefully provides them some way of learning about people and growing. We have contact theory for a reason. Contact theory is the more you hang out with a more diverse group of people, the less likely you are to be phobic of them, to be homophobic or transphobic. And so when we take away, just real quick, when we take away when we take away these sources of meeting people and things like that, and thinking, oh well, they'll have all the free time in the world after they're done with the work. It's just not a clear picture of the actual boots on the actual view from the ground. You know what I mean?
Let's
It's
check
a
out.
very
Let's check
but
out
that's not-
Desperado. Sorry, the people in line. Desperado, please.
So I wonder if this is not necessarily something that we can just focus on work in general. If this is something just maybe a societal problem, not necessarily focused on work itself, and not necessarily focused on, oh, we need people to have more interaction and work is one of the only places where we can do it. If you think about it, from like for the last almost 30 years, most people have existed online. The way our brains wrap around being online is a sense of, in essence, freedom, because we're free to connect and disconnect at any time. So we tend to be more candid. We tend to be more like, what is it like honest. We like all of our takes tend to be like more nuanced and whatnot, and we don't have to deal about that social interaction with a bunch of people around us at the same time. I wonder if society itself, not just having work, but society itself is having problems with going out and doing these activities, because we then have to shift from our candid nature back to our kind of reserved nature inside a social setting with a bunch of people.
Then we'll go to Kamikaze. And
So it's interesting. A lot of the things that you're talking about, you say you can't socialize and meet up with coworkers, but that's so the opposite. When you work remote, you have to be on, Slack, I don't know, whatever, Teams, all these business things to where you're talking and working one-on-one still with people. If anything, sometimes it's more personal. So if the situation comes up where you're going to go hang out with someone and play games, it's still going to come up. That's not something where you're not going to do. And also, let's be fair, a lot of gamers aren't exactly socializing at work very much either. There's like this, and I'm not being mean, but I've seen a lot of people. I'm not the most social guy, but damn. And on top of that, 43%, there's a ton of stats on it. Everybody who works from home, for the most part, I'm sure it's the same assholes who talk at the water cooler 40 hours a week that aren't. 43% more compared to other workers are more productive. That means they have more time for their hobbies. So as this goes on,
well, how do you get that from that? How do you get they're more productive so they have more time for their hobbies? How does those two things relate in any way?
Well, that's the problem. We have to push forward, and as more people become more productive, the methodologies companies use will change. Companies are already seeing a benefit.
Oh yeah, you think that they're going to allow them more time? They're just, oh, you're more productive now. This is a new standard. You're just
if monitoring isn't employed, I highly doubt they'll care or monitor. So I know a lot of companies where people seem to have a lot more time now to do a lot of more shit. I understand what you're saying, but if we can deal with the problem with monitoring systems that some companies are trying to implement, which is the new battle. I don't know if you guys have heard of this, but there's the face tracking and all this. This is a big concern and where the fight needs to focus, because that needs to go away. But businesses that, if you're not a contractor or someone like in certain fields, the way you are federally mandated to report your hours, you'll have flexibility. I know this isn't all the case, but this is saying remote work, you won't have social interaction. Remote work, you won't work directly with people and learn social skills.
You'll have less.
You will have less, but you won't have any. And a lot of people are making it sound like, oh, you're done. There's nothing anymore. And it's
possible you might have less. You might have more because you have less time. Excuse me. It's possible that you might have more because you have that feeling of, fuck, I've been trapped in the house all goddamn day. I want to get out. Like, that's a perfectly natural thing that happens. I don't know why we're pretending that it's not, but like, I don't see why this is your immediate go-to. Like, that's not.
Kazi, you have something to respond? Then we got to move on to Poetry.
No, I don't disagree. Everything that's been said about this is what it is. That's why the hybrid model works, making people go to the main one. But then the problem is you lose a lot of benefits if you do a hybrid model. Now you lose that remote ability to go and live anywhere you want in the U.S. And so it's going to have to be maybe hybrid model for a lot of businesses. And then over time, we figure this issue out. But let's be honest, companies are just going to rip the cord and fuck everybody who needs to socialize. Either it's going to work or it's not. That's how it's really going to happen. And people pretending like remote work isn't a new thing. The companies aren't going back. I know my company is, and my boss is the most old-fashioned guy in the world, and he now just gave up. It's just too much pushback. They're making money on this. They actually are making money. So
let's go to Flow Trace.
I guess I'll just start on Kamikaze's point. I agree that remote work still has some socialization, but it still has less socialization. That's fundamentally the problem. Just because people are going to have more time for their hobbies doesn't mean that they're going to have more socialization, and that's the fundamental problem. I actually 100% agree with you. A hybrid model is 100% what I'd like to see. I think that some remote work can be good, but the model of going fully remote is really the thing that I'm absolutely opposed to. On Doobie's point, I would like it if people made friends outside of work. Making friends outside of work is better than making friends inside work, but the problem is that people aren't doing that. People are not going out and making friends outside of work. If they were, this wouldn't be a problem, but they fundamentally aren't. And in regards to Desperado's point of it being a societal problem, that it's absolutely true that this goes beyond outside of the realm of remote work. I am not trying to solve the problem of socialization by preventing remote work. I'm trying to prevent the problem from getting worse, because I think that this just represents a further devolution and sort of degeneration of our ability to socialize. I think fundamentally, anybody who disagrees with my position, and I'd love to hear Doobie answer this question next, is I have two questions. Number one, do you think that people, especially young people, are becoming increasingly socially isolated as a result of being online? And number two, the question is, how do we solve that problem? If all it took was the existence of things like meetup.com to solve this problem, then the problem would already be solved. But clearly, we need to be doing something else, and it's not enough to just tell people. Maybe we just need 10, 20 years of this before people realize, man, I should go up on meetup.com, and the problem will be solved. That would be great. But as of right now, it seems obvious, and I think that everyone here would agree, that people are becoming increasingly socially isolated from going online, and I don't know what the solution to that is. As long as we don't have a solution, I don't like advancing that first problem.
Doobie?
I feel like this is a made-up issue. I think it's a massive self-report when people bring it up and are this angry about it. I don't think the average person is having a lot of trouble finding ways to socialize if they want to socialize. Maybe what you're saying is people aren't as interested in socializing right now, probably because of COVID in the last couple of years, right? That's probably contributed to that a ton. But I think that generally, if you want to socialize, if you're a young person who wants to socialize, you can find ways to socialize, right? And I mean in person, right? So, yeah, I really think that like this is like, and I think even people who aren't socializing are, I'd venture to say that they're like still much more connected to other people than they have been in previous generations. Because if you're the type of person who feels weird going to a yoga class or doing a hobby or going to doing volunteer work to meet people, whatever the fuck, before the internet, you would probably just sit at home, right? Read a book, watch some, I Love Lucy or something. Now you can get on the internet and talk to people from all over the planet. You can get on camera with them if you want to, right? And you can have friends. You can develop long-lasting relationships that, for years over the internet, right? So these people probably feel far more connected than they did in previous generations, right? So I don't know. It feels like a made-up issue, and I'd like to point out, by the way, that I think the stereotype that was pushed earlier of the most oppressed class, the gamers, all being like, neckbeards who don't know how to socialize, don't go outside, live in the darkness, don't see the light of day unless they're forced to by work. Right? I think that's a really gross stereotype, and it's bad.
I would love to jump in.
Justin and then Floyd.
I'm gonna go, guys.
I'm gonna go.
I'll see you
Bye.
later.
Everyone,
Take
man,
care.
thanks for being
Thank
here.
you for bye, man.
Yep.
I'll jump in really quick, but someone else can do.
Okay, so we'll
go ahead,
Justin.
Brento. That's fine.
All
All right, mine's brief. I'll be really brief. You're right. There's a lot of things that I think are lost by people no longer going into the workplace, but I do think there will be opportunities for other things, and I don't think people are going to stop socializing. I just think for now we're experiencing a shift, but new opportunities will emerge and new ways for people to interact and work together will continue. People will work from home though. I don't think you can possibly get around like the savings, the infrastructure savings, the liability savings for different things. Like if you have a building and you have people in there, there's liabilities that go along with that. You need to have, systems, you need to have like fire, you need to have trainings. And if people can perform the work that your business needs to be successful and profitable, without having to provide a space for them to do that, and you can just get the same quality work. You can't beat that, and there's no way you can't be like, well, we should all just drive in and also provide parking and things like. No, it's impossible. You'll never get past this.
Austin and then Flo.
Flo, I'm gonna do my best to just try and answer your questions. There, you had two, but just to touch off of like what Brento was talking about. Yeah, no, like I think once companies start crunching the numbers on even what they're just going to start saving on like income tax, it's going to be a huge fucking deal for that property. It's also going to mean that we're going to have to figure out from a governmental standpoint of view of like where are we going to get this money at or from, right? Like, and then what are we going to do with these giant ass buildings if they do become abandoned? Like, there's a bunch of different things that have to be one addressed from legislation standpoint of like how employees will now interact and ensure that their employers interact with how their employees are working. Yeah, we're going to have to work on that legislation. There's going to be a huge social dynamic change, but I see a lot of positives in my mind. I think the first question you asked, Flo Trace, was, do we agree the idea that people, as of right now, are falling in a more and more isolated status? Was that the question?
Basically, is there a trend where people are becoming more socially isolated? Yes, particularly
okay.
among young people, and that is
Yeah.
because of increasingly being online rather than in physical places.
Yeah, sure. I would say perhaps. I know it's kind of a pissant, like not really an answer, but let me explain why. It may not be the fact that they are receiving less social interaction. It may be that they are falling more and more into smaller categories that we don't always catch. I'm going to give you two that are problematic that we do know exist. One, the incel community, that level of isolation, and then two, a bit of a neo-Nazi kind of like super hard right-wing core kind of fascist groups. We do see a lot of movement ever since the 90s for isolated young adult males. So that's something that, again, we're going to have to address and do our best to try and work around. But I don't necessarily always agree that they're going to fall into just these categories, right? They're going to start finding a lot more of different individual likes are going to end up having better, smaller, tighter knit social groups. And I do view that as a positive, but we have to have some level of social communal interaction that we need to start figuring out how we're going to handle these. So yeah, feel free to touch base wherever you want.
Trace, Trace, then Lick, Kamikaze, you want to jump in as well?
I'd like to also get in line as well if I could.
All right, Godcash.
Yeah, so I agree with Doobie that if people want to socialize, they will. But the problem is that people do not want to socialize, and people do not always want things that are good for them. People often want things that are actually very bad for them. And I think that this is an example. A lot of these social media platforms and a lot of these online presences are designed to be addictive, are designed to be like drugs, to trigger those dopamine rushes. And people are going to fall for that, yes, but that does not mean it's good for them. I'm sure a lot of people would want to eat nothing but McDonald's every day, but that would obviously be very bad for them. And if we lived in a society where people were eating almost nothing but McDonald's, I would kind of have a problem if work started offering free McDonald's for anyone who works in the office. I agree with Brento and sort of Redhead's point that it is true that the genie is probably out of the bottle, but I think that I'm basically just, I think it's just like try or die. We're never going to get rid of remote work. I'm just trying to limit it as much as possible because I think it is very harmful. In regards to these adaptations, Brento, like I hope these come out, but they're not coming yet. And until we know what those are, I want to slow down on remote work. I don't want this massive transition that we're currently seeing in America and in other Western nations. I guess on Redhead's point, I think that actually the alt-right incels kind of prove my point here, because these kinds of groups prey on lonely young men that don't have socialization, and the growth of these groups is evidence of an increasing problem of lonely young men. If you look at other things like ISIS, for example, there was a lot of talk sort of early in like 2016 about how Western people, Western fighters who were going to join ISIS, were these people like Islamic radicals, or were they economically anxious? And it turned out that actually a lot of them were just lonely young men who didn't really have anything in their life that they felt like had meaning. And one of the best ways to give everyone a meaning, things in their life that feel meaningful, is real human relationships, the kind of things that you cannot replicate online, or certainly cannot replicate anywhere near to the same level. I think it's just undeniable that the relationships you have with people in real life are a lot more meaningful, generally speaking, and that if we're having a problem of people not having these kinds of relationships, well then maybe we shouldn't cut out a huge chunk of people's actual real interactions and sort of subsume that into the online realm.
Can I
I think
respond to him? Wait,
Oh,
is
sure.
that all right? Or okay. Sorry, Wick. Maybe this will help touch base with you as well too. Like Flo, I feel like you're trying to have it both ways here, brother. Like you said, people are social creatures. They are going to gravitate towards social interactions, and then you want to talk about social isolation. Like, and that's kind of why I brought up those examples, is to prove the point that we are social creatures. We need to figure out how we're going to manage this from a communal standpoint, right? From a governmental standpoint, right? These are the important parts that as this transition begins to happen, as that genie is unleashed from the bottle, you need to start having legislation to address these points. You need to start enabling, uh, law enforcement, anti-terrorist groups. You need to start figuring out what this new form of managing, uh, homegrown terrorists. And again, this is going to be of an incredibly minute fucking fraction, but it is important to address it. Don't disagree with your idea of like bringing this up, but to say that it's going to be like the end all be all, it's just not. We are social creatures. You do have it right from the start. I do see your worry, but I feel like that you're worried so much because we just don't have a plan, when the plan in of itself is because we are social creatures. We are going to seek out those conversations or those interactions.
Wait,
so.
hold on. But can I explain that? So these adaptations you're talking about already do exist. Right? I posted one in chat earlier, this meetup.com thing. If that doesn't work for you, if you have a Facebook profile, right, there's a good chance you can find a local Facebook group full of people with similar interests. Right, if that doesn't work for you, there's an app called Nextdoor, I think it is, that breaks it down to like within 3 miles of where you fucking live. Right, and you go on there, you'll find tons of people in your neighborhood talking, selling shit, planning barbecues, doing whatever the fuck, right? Because lots of people do want to socialize. If that doesn't work, go to fucking Craigslist or something, right? There are tons of ways to do this, right? So to say these adaptations don't exist is like, I don't understand where you're getting this idea.
Well, it's kind of. Go ahead, Wick. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it. Because Flowtrace touched on something I think is very important and worth kind of delving into, worth kind of really narrowing in on. So my problem with remote work isn't in a vacuum. If there was no other issues here, if there was no other problems, remote work would be fine. I think it would be okay. But the problem is that people, instead of they're gravitating. The problem is that we have social media in the mix, and the comparison to fast food and the harm that that does is very apt, because again, these companies, they design it to fulfill a social need, but the way in which it does so is very unhealthy. It's very much not a replacement for face-to-face interaction, but people are treating it as a replacement for face-to-face interaction, and this is having a detrimental effect on how we socialize. It's having a detrimental effect on how we communicate with each other. It's having a detrimental effect with how we engage in politics. It's having a detrimental effect in so many issues, so many ways. And there are groups out there, and the reason I don't think that we are going to get many adaptations, as Brento was saying, is because these companies who run these things have every financial incentive to be that adaptation, but it is an unhealthy one. It is one that is causing harm to us, and it is we can see this. We can see this kind of spreading. We can see this getting worse. And when you add on to that the adaptation of remote work, this just exacerbates the problem. Again, in a vacuum, remote work might be fine, but it's in this environment, in this time, right now, it's hurting us.
Gotta move on to Kamikaze, you wanted to go.
Oh, so this is just more of a tangent question. But one of the things I always recall, a lot of people love the debate, is food preparation. They say a lot of people eat fast food because of food preparation. So if you're working from home, you technically have a little more free time and you're directly near your kitchen. So wouldn't that make you eat healthier, or at least give you an opportunity for it? Wouldn't that be a benefit? Just an idea. I don't really have much else to say. Everything's kind of been rehashed. So.
Well, let's go to Gothgash. We'll go to Flowtrace and then Justin.
Okay, so I don't know what all was mentioned before I got here, or I was watching, but I think that we got a little derailed on some of the like incel talk, so I'll try to avoid some of that because I thought that whole topic was a little ridiculous. I think that remote work is still in its infancy, and we obviously I think without having to go dig up stats, we can all agree that COVID would be one of the obviously the biggest catalyst we've seen, which is really recent, right? So we're not going to have really good data on anything for a while. But the obvious upside is just dramatically there, in my opinion. I don't see how we can argue that like the social isolation issues are there or whatever. I do see like I do think that that's like a valid complaint to a degree, but I don't think it nearly outweighs all the pro side of remote work. And I think the one of the biggest cons, if no one mentioned it, would be any type of organization. Like, so if you're trying to organize your workplace, that may be a little trickier if all of your communications with your fellow coworkers are completely monitored because they're going through company systems. Again, that's that may be one little thing, but all the pros are just ridiculous. They're not even debatable. So you have cut down on use of infrastructure, cut down on personal spending with your transportation. Somebody mentioned the meal prep. You don't have to own a car anymore necessarily if you did to commute to work. You don't have to get on the bus, on the train. You don't. You may not have to hire a sitter. Like you make it out of childcare. Like those costs are huge. Then you have like things that I don't think anyone mentioned, which is something like geographical arbitrage. Did anybody mention that? You don't want to live in the valley.
Yeah.
You don't want to live. You don't want to live in the goddamn bay. Okay, move to where I live. Go buy a nice house for 150K. A nice house. You want a really nice house? Spend 300, and get land. You can have it. You can have acres upon acres, 20, 30 acres or more, for under 500K. No problem. Nice house, everything. And guess what? Gigabit internet still. So to sit there and tell me that like, well, it's because we're going to lack social isolation, have more incels is absolutely laughable because we've had these problems for years. Those problems aren't going away, and I don't think they're going to be all of a sudden somehow amplified just because of remote work. That's not the issue. These issues are starting way earlier. These issues are starting in schools. They're starting with teenagers. It's starting way before that. So if the issue is maybe remote schooling, maybe we can have that conversation. But I'm 33 years old. I'm not going to be an incel any more than I was yesterday because I'm working from home.
I'd go ahead. Patrice, and then
Yeah, so I guess just to immediately speak to Gothcash's point, I agree that there are all these goods. My problem is that none of these goods are sort of in the same plane that the bad is in. These are all great benefits to people's quality of life, and they're really mostly forms of like economic benefits or time-saving benefits. But my problem is that none of these come even close to how more fundamental I think the human social psyche is, and how important it is to have that. You're absolutely right that this problem is not going away if we stop remote work, and that does start upstream. But I think it's funny that you say that it does start upstream, but this can't be amplified. Well, something that amplifies it is something that does fundamentally happen downstream. Just because there are bigger fundamental reasons for why people are becoming less socialization doesn't mean that remote work couldn't make that problem better or worse, whichever way we say it is. But I think it's firmly in the case that is going to make it worse because it's going to result in people having less in-person interactions and their social life being more subsumed by online. I guess onto Redhead's point, I think Wick sort of already hit the nail on the head. Yes, people seek socialization, but the kinds of socialization that they're getting on online are fundamentally they're empty calories. They are bad. It's like the fast food equivalent where these interactions you have are not the same, they're not fulfilling, and they still lead to these intense feelings of loneliness and a lack of friendship. I agree, Doobie, that we do have these adaptations, but the key is that these adaptations are not solving the problem. Doobie, if it is the case that all we need is Facebook and Meetup.com, then why is it the case that people are feeling more lonely year after year? That the amount of friend groups that people report are like cut in half in the last 20 years. These adaptations would work if people use them, but they don't work. And if people aren't willing to use the adaptation, then it doesn't matter how good it is on paper. If people aren't using it in the real world, then it fundamentally does not solve the problem. If you have ways to get people to use Facebook or Meetup, legitimately, I would come over to your side immediately. If there was some way that we could get people to go out and want to socialize, because I agree, if people would want to socialize, if they could like sort of mount that crest and sort of get over their social fears and get outside and talk to people, then this problem could be over. But they aren't, and that is the question: how do we make it so that people want to socialize? Because if they don't want to, they're not going to be using these things like Facebook or Meetup.com. That's why work, where they don't have a choice and they're forced to go, is such a great thing.
go ahead.
Can I refute? Can I refute first?
Okay, you refute first. And
Okay, so to what you said, I think that like you can't divorce the economic and the social and psychological benefits at all. Like I don't think that's fair, because if you've been poor, you would know that the amount of like stress that is caused by that poverty is ridiculous. Uh, just an example, like I said, if you didn't have to have a car, like I have a 2020 Toyota RAV4. My insurance for comprehensive is about $200. It's rolled in with my homeowners, so I don't know exactly what the car is, but around 200, I think, is what the car is. If I didn't have to have that, and I didn't have to spend whatever the hell I'm spending on gas now, like that alone would be enough money for me to do all types of shit every month in social things, right? Or to just save more money. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, so you can't act like that hasn't had some benefit and psychological component where I'm not stressed and I'm able to go out and do things that have some type of economic barrier that like I'm not saying for me personally, like personally I'd be able to do
No, I
most of the
understand.
things I would do, but for a lot of people, like those things add up and will keep them from being able to go to a baseball game or go to a concert, go to a movie theater or whatever the hell they want to do. So I think that we have to attribute some of this isolation to just the economic effects that we're currently living in. That new study came out that like 60 some odd percent of people can't afford a $500 emergency. There you go.
Um, I'm just curious, like, where do you think the loneliness is coming from, or this like antisocial behavior is coming from?
Social
What?
media, most definitely. I think
No,
that.
okay, hold on. Wait, hold on. Maybe expand on that. Maybe that is what you mean.
Mhm.
I hope that's not what you mean.
I,
So my
I
question to
do.
be clear. So Flow Trace is saying, hey, these people don't want to socialize. So I want to know, why don't they want to? Right. So you think the answer to that is social media?
I think a lot of it is not obviously not all of it, but I think a lot of it is that social media provides this false sense of socialization. So they think they're getting what they need. They think they feel that they're getting what they need, but they're not actually making those human connections. That I think that there is a marked difference between how we interact and how we socialize in person versus how we socialize online. There just is. There's
Yeah, of course.
ways
But
of
I
speaking,
don't
ways
think
of
like,
working with each other, things like that. And I think that people are using social media as a substitute, and they think they're full of social interaction when they're not, and they're not getting what
wait,
they
hold on.
need.
But maybe okay. I could see. I think people, a lot of people. I mean, I'm aware of lots of people in my own community, right? My giant ass Discord server. Lots of very lonely people in there who are using Discord in the community on my server as like a substitute for having like real life friends and shit. Definitely happens. But I think that's like the second. That's like what you do to cope with the antisocial feelings, right? Or so I think you might have those like backwards. I don't think they do this and then they feel fulfilled when they're not actually fulfilled, so they don't actually go out and meet people. I think they're, for some reason, they don't want to meet people. They don't feel comfortable meeting people for whatever reason. So they use this to like cope with it, right? So I'm wondering, where, if that's the case, where do you guys think the first problem is coming from? Like the actual core of the issue, which is people not wanting to go out and meet people unless they're forced to.
I def-
Well, did Flo or Wick want to respond to that? I'm completely fine. If they
Yeah, I
do.
guess I would just say I I don't know where all of it's coming from. I can tell you parts of where it's coming from, but I don't think you have to have the answer to a question to ask a question. And I think it is a good question. I think that Wick is sort of right on the money, but I think there's a slight caveat. When most people get in a ditch in life, they hang up a picture instead of getting out of the ditch. And going online is really easy. Going outside is hard. I think everyone here can relate to being that friend who agrees to go do something, and then the night of, you're just like, I don't really want to do it. I don't want to go through the effort of getting up and going out and doing that. Whereas, getting on Discord, that's one click away. Going on Facebook, that's all you have to do is open your phone. So I think it's the case that a lot of these social media platforms are entrapping. They suck you in, and they are just incredibly toxic. I think there are also some other reasons too. I think that no doubt COVID is a big element of it as well. But I think that this problem goes a lot, is a lot older than just COVID itself. I think that it seems to be the case that young people, Doobie, I agree with you. Young people are just too soft. people are not willing to go out and have some negative experiences and that paralyzing fear, right? It's like the meme where everyone in our generation is afraid of telling the waiter that, like, I asked for breadsticks instead of French fries. I don't know what it is, but people just seem to be incredibly adverse to any sort of difficulty or adversity. And as a result, social interactions, putting yourself out there, can be really uncomfortable sometimes. It's a leap of faith sometimes to approach someone and say, "Hi, my name is John. What's your name?" And as a result, I think that's another big contributor. But as to why people are feeling those feelings, I don't know. I don't have all the answers for why people are having these problems, and I think that's part of the problem as to getting solutions. I don't know what the solutions are. Again, I don't think that stopping remote work is going to solve this problem, but going forward on remote work is going to make it worse, and we shouldn't be doing that when we don't even have a solution in sight.
Yeah, I honestly, I genuinely think that this is like I don't want to say it's projection. I really don't think
I'll
this
say it.
issue
Say it's
is.
projection. Say it's projection.
I really don't think this issue is like widespread as you think it is, right? And I think that the way you're speaking about it is if, hey, we need to slow down on remote work, which has all these other benefits, great benefits. I didn't even think of the one that Kamikaze brought up earlier. Right? People not going out and eating fast food because they don't have to drive by the McDonald's every day. Right? That's a huge benefit to people. Right? So
No, they're just going to Uber Eats it.
Are we seriously,
if
Tubi, are we
they're in a
really
situation
arguing
where they
right
can
now? Are
pay
we really arguing right now
$30
that
for the
social
same thing they
media
would have
hasn't
paid
had a
$10 for.
super negative effect on how we socialize? Are you really arguing right
Yeah,
now
I don't
that
think it.
social media
I think it's had a. I
you
think
don't?
it's had an extremely positive effect. It's connected people from all over the fucking world, and now there are people who don't have these caricatures of people in fucking
Bangladesh.
British land or whatever.
Do I have to do the
Bangladesh,
Google? Do I have
right?
to Google?
Canada.
God damn it.
So you guys, I don't know where the fuck you guys live. Right? You probably live thousands of miles from me, some of you, right? But we can speak to each other as human beings, and I think that's a beautiful thing. Right? I think it's genuinely a beautiful thing. Right? So to say that it's had like negative consequences, like overall, is just batshit crazy to me.
No, you
Not
mentioned one
overall.
pro on this, but no. Overall, there are good to social media. Social media isn't all bad, but overall, the negative impact on society, I think, is pretty obvious, and it's spreading. We could see it in almost every facet of communication that we have nowadays. There's a lot of runoff effects from this for the way news is handled, for the way things are reported, for the way we interact online, how well, I'll just give you one statistic right now. Women, especially young women, are self-harming themselves more and more because they cannot get away from the bullying that they felt at school. Before social media, they could go home and have a safe place, but now they can't escape it. It's all there. It's always around, and we have this constant harassment and this constant like echo chambers feeding each other more and more. Radicalization is growing at a rapid rate. Again, while social media isn't all bad, there are some benefits to it. We have no guardrails in place. We have no real conception of how to handle it socially as a species, and we're going down a bad place with it. It's
I have a place we can take this. You're closer to where I was. Doobie, you can respond to that, but I have a place where we can.
Um, I I don't think there's much to respond to. There's a fundamental disagreement here. I'd love to get into it, right? These harms, right? The negative consequences of social media. I'd like to know some of what Wiki actually means by that, and how we can see that demonstrated, and how news stories are handled and all this kind of shit. But that's like a whole thing. So if you have something else, we can go there instead.
Well, it dovetails with that. So I'm wondering how far as a society that we should go to, like alleviate these ills. So, like, Wick is saying that there's a whole bunch of negative externalities that come with these, right? With coming remote work, uh, and
social media specifically as
so
well.
so it's social media too. No, thank you. Social media specifically as well. That these things, our society hasn't figured out how to deal with them. Okay, well then, how far do we have to go? So there are people within Dewey Server, as he said, who are using it because of whatever reason they're not socializing otherwise. What does society have to do to make these people comfortable? when it comes to radicalization, what do we have to do to make these people comfortable, right? Like, should the idea to be making these people comfortable, or to just fucking jail them, right? If you're radicalized, well, I'm sorry you had a sad childhood. I'm sorry people picked on you when you were a kid. But we have a nice, comfy jail cell, and you can socialize with the prisoners there. Like, what does society have to do to like, does society have to accommodate everyone like that, or just not?
So when you talk, how do we handle this? Well, it depends on the problem we're having. I think that the way we handle, for example, online bullying is going to be very different than how we handle the effects of how we deal with radicalization groups. I think that those are different problems that need to be handled differently. However, they do stem in part, not all the way. This isn't social media isn't the sole cause here, but social media amplifies these problems. It exacerbates these problems to a degree that we were not expecting as a species, I do not think, as a culture. And again, we haven't figured out how to handle it. Do I have the answer here? I don't. I really don't know. But I don't have to know how to fix. I don't have to know how to put out a fire to say, hey, look, the house is on fucking fire. There's a problem. Maybe I don't know how to fix it, but there it is, gang.
Yeah, I don't think there's a problem. So you guys keep saying that they're like negative externalities, and these are like the social ills caused by these things, yada yada. But can we be like specific?
I posted a
So,
couple links in the VC chat channel if you wanted, because I said I'd Google for you. I mean, there's numerous studies on like the effects on teenagers and social media, causing like increases in anxiety, depression.
I think
poor
if we have a
body
fundamental
image,
disagreement as to the negative externalities of social media, that's not going to get resolved in this panel tonight. I don't think that doing the sort of
okay,
I do
well,
appreciate.
then, okay, but the
go ahead.
issue
Listen, there's
is
a lot of
that
evidence there.
given that the premise is built on that, right? It like
Yeah, we
if
can't
we're
move
saying,
on
hey, we're not going to move, then I just think we need to talk about this, right? So again, so Wick, so if is it just the anxiety? Is it people are more
Oh, of course not.
anxious, right?
Of course
Like,
not. Like,
is it just like the cyberbullying? You know, because people don't know how to use up the block button or tell their parents or people at school that, hey, this kid's doing this shit to me, right? Is it this radicalization thing is you guys keep talking about, which I think is the way that you guys are thinking about that is kind of screwy, because it's true that young kids do have access to lots of things they probably shouldn't have access to. Very dangerous places on the internet, right? But at the same time, they have access to lots of things that can counter those same things, right? Whereas in the past, right, you had like whole fucking families and communities that'd be full of fucking KKK members, right? Because they were just interacting with each other. They weren't interacting with anybody else outside of this specific little circle, right? So the people's ability to interact with people all over the fucking planet is a massive like contributor to decreases in radicalism, decreases in like racism and shit like that. Right? I think it's an extremely positive thing.
so, you mentioned these point by point, and these aren't the only points that are a problem. But while again, social media isn't all bad, it does have some positive effects. Overall, at least in North America, we have data that it's actually hurting how we deal with each other. It's not just the rise in anxiety. It's not just the rise of online bullying and people being unable to escape. And this, again, we have data on this. It shows that for the last, I want to say 15 years since the advent of social media, self-harm among young women especially has risen at a dramatic and extreme rate. And this is tied directly to them being unable to escape the harassment. Like again, before, as I said, they could go home and they could have a respite from this. Now they can't, because as so much of our social lives, so much of the culture is online. If you take yourself online, if you choose to remove yourself, you deprive yourself from access to a lot of these good things that we as a culture have built on. Like fucking Twitter. If you're not on Twitter as a business thing, you're missing out on a lot. If you're not trying to get your LinkedIn profile out there, you're missing out on a lot. And so, but the problem comes with that, those good comes these little poison pills that we haven't learned to deal with yet. And I think that again, we're just pressing on the gas, and we're driving off a cliff when we could just, maybe slow down a little bit, put some guardrails in place, put some, again, I don't know what the answer is here, but we need to do something because what we're doing now is not working. It is
I
not
think
working.
boiling down the issue of like women like self-harming to they're seeing hot women on Instagram that they'll never look like. It's social media and people are bullying them and shit is really I don't want to be mean. It's really silly, right? I think that um there are tons of other reasons, right, that people self-harm. Way more pressing reasons than, Kim Kardashian posted her ass on Twitter again, right? And I think boiling it all down to specifically social media
I never
is
said
like
it
the
was
wrong way
all
to.
about social media, but
Okay,
social
well
media
then,
exacerbates it to a degree that no other tool does.
okay, but okay, but if you have like self-esteem issues, right, for whatever fucking reason, and you're interacting with other human beings, and you feel like you're like not you're worthless, right? Then that's going to exacerbate it too, right? So it seems like just human interaction. If you have that low self-esteem, you have those kind of mental problems where you need some kind of fucking like therapy or something. Human interaction in general is going to be negative for you, right? So lots of these people with these kind of problems, right, will go to places like Discord, like Twitter, even like Instagram, to find people to speak to relate to vent about these things, and to talk them through this, and to get help, and and a lot of these people end up going to see like an actual therapist, or if they don't have the fucking money for it, they have a friend group that talks about this and works through these things together, and they wouldn't have access to that without social media, right? So like I feel like you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater here.
We have and then
Yeah, I just want to answer sort of Prime's question before I get back to the question of whether or not this is fun and exists. Prime, there was a man, a great man that was robbed. The potential first gay president, Mayor Pete Buttigieg, who had an amazing suggestion about a national service program for young adults to build national cohesion. That would be a great thing, I think. But the problem is, people won't go to it. There really doesn't, in a more serious note, there really doesn't seem to be any solutions right now that are actually attainable. Because, like Doobie says, I think the problem is that people don't want to do this, and it's pretty hard to force people to do something that they don't want to, especially in a country like
I
America.
disagree with you on that. Sorry, I disagree. I don't remember what fucking that gay
Judges.
Pete wanted. He's horrible. But like we've talked about this before. I know Doobie and I have talked about it. And the others maybe. Just having like a civic core, right? Like expanding America core.
Hell yeah.
Massively expanding a jobs program there for young people to jump, especially for young people, but maybe not just for them. To jump in to help out America, to travel, right? To go to different parts of the country, and maybe even expand it to other countries, right? Sending our people, our best over there, right? Like that. I think that would actually go a long way. So I disagree with you completely. Go ahead.
Well, no, I'm saying that I'm saying I think that could go a long way.
Okay, the opposite.
Yeah, I think that is a good idea, but I think it's limited by the fact that as soon as you do that, unless you make it compulsory, not that many, it's not going to get to enough people. And making it compulsory, I think that's just going to be a political nightmare.
Compulsory.
I don't.
But
Yeah.
I disagree. But go ahead. But finish.
Anyways, yeah, and then just on Doobie's point, I guess if we don't fundamentally agree that social media is having these negative effects, I don't think slinging Google studies back at each other is going to be effective. I don't think it's going to convince you. And if it does, I would prefer it doesn't, because I think that in order to properly grapple with the study, you can't just be like reading it through one eye while you're listening to the debate in the other eye, or one ear in the other ear. I think I guess what I would ask Doobie is, do you think that it seems that like young people, especially that Western societies, particularly young people, seem to be getting a lot worse in terms of their mental health? And if not social media, where do you think that's coming from? Because I think it's pretty settled at this point that like the kids are not all right when it comes to mental health. And I would be curious, like, what do you think, or if you don't have an answer, that's acceptable as well. But do you have any explanation for that outside of the increased online presence of social media and how that dominates teen social lives and young adult social lives?
I think people are just more aware now of mental health issues. Right? I think people have always been kind of fucked up, and now we have names for these things, and people are aware that you can go see a therapist and get some medication help with these things. Whereas in the past, you might have been just told to spray some Windex on your face and keep going forward, right? Which is my approach, by the way.
But
but
do
so I
Brand
think
specific,
I think
though?
I think people are just like far more aware of mental health issues just generally, right? So it's going to look like there's a massive increase in like anxiety and depression and all these things, but these things have always been around.
The increase in
I'm ready.
awareness doesn't. The increase in awareness doesn't explain the rise, again the dramatic increase in the reports, the
Absolutely
self-reports of
does.
people. I disagree entirely. I just do not think that the data is
You think
explained.
30, 40 years ago, the average dude would have been
No, but
comfortable
this
admitting
isn't
that he was
raises from
depressed
34.
or anxious?
This isn't rate raises from 30 and 40 years ago. This is rate raises that are directly coincided with the advent and rise of social media in the last 10 years.
Well, hold on. Social media and the internet and people's ability to access the internet and to access things like WebMD and YouTube videos that talk about mental health, where before lots of people don't have access to mental health services. They don't know about the shit at all. Right? So they feel sad, they feel anxious, they talk to their parents or their friends, and they try to work through it. Now, there's a name for it. They can be diagnosed, they can get medication. Right, or if they can't get it, at least they know what the fuck it is.
But that was
But that's
Somebody
available
asks them,
before social
"Hey, do
media
you
in the
feel this
90s.
way?" No, nowhere near the same level. Nowhere near the same level.
Okay, when I again having AOL, getting that little CD, putting it in. I'm giving my age away here now, but you could Google all this shit. That these sites existed. You could have access to it, but social media didn't really get off the ground until I'd say the advent
Okay.
of Facebook and things like that. So again, it we didn't see those spikes with just the internet and just the information,
I don't know.
with just the
I'm
awareness.
actually very.
We
I'm actually
saw
curious
those
about
spikes
something.
when we saw again with the advent of like Instagram and Facebook and things like that. And again, there's been studies specifically looking at the effects of these specific platforms, so TikTok or Instagram or what have you.
They take like self surveys, right? Yeah, if you ask 20,000 people if they're feeling anxious and depressed and shit, they might know enough about that now, more now than they would have known 20, 30 years ago to say, yeah, I think I feel depressed. But here's what I'm curious about, because this sounds a lot like an argument that a lot of conservative type people use against like trans people, for example. It always kind of gets back to trans people somehow. But here's the thing.
It
They will
doesn't have
say,
to if you don't bring
yeah,
it there,
well,
man.
here's the thing. They'll say, "Hey, there's an explosion of trans people. Trans people are everywhere now. They're all over the internet. They're all over TV. They're in movies. They're talking about them all the time. Lots of people are now they're non-binary. And oh God,
Why are you trying to
they want to get
create?
into the
Why
bathrooms.
are you trying to
No,
equate
wait. Here's
trans with self-harm? They're not
Wait,
the
will you
same.
just listen?
I'm not trying to get equated with
No,
self-harm.
because this is
I'm
fucking
not trying to
bullshit.
equate it
He's
with
not
self-harm.
doing that, you putz.
Hold on.
Pay
Hold
attention.
on. What I'm equating it to is, and what people who are like trans allies or whatever would say is, hey, they've always been here. People have always felt this way. Now they know what it is, and now we have a way to talk about it, and they can treat it, and all this kind of. And they don't need to feel ashamed anymore. So now they're out in the open. Some of them, right? So it actually isn't an explosion of trans people. These people have been here the entire fucking time. We shouldn't know about them. I think it's exactly similar to that.
It's not. Again, self-harm, diagnoses, and things like that are not the same as when it comes to
He's not saying they're the
trans
same. He's
issues.
just saying there's a similar
I
phenomena of them
understand similar
existing and not being
phenomenon, but I
reported.
do not think that these are any way correlated. No.
Congratulations.
Okay, it's really hard not to
Voting
get caught up in
page.
the arguing trap here because it's really tantalizing, but it's really a fascinating discussion that's going on here. And it shows why we can't get things done in our country because, like politics, everybody takes half the good and half the bad on the one side, and then the other side takes half the good and half the bad. And then it comes down to who's going to be right about stuff. So, with the social media thing, there's obviously things that are very bad and it's concentrated and gotten very specific, like to teenage girls' self-esteem type of thing. But then you get like revolutions that are done on Twitter and other things that happen that really move us far forward. And we can talk more about how we're getting faster and faster technology going and being able to manage it in better ways without getting caught in that arguing trap. I mean, just being here right now, it's really hard for me just to stay focused on staying out of that because it's just so tantalizing.
I think what I would
We have
say
a,
is
we have
that
a we have a name for that now. It's called ADHD, and we can prescribe Adderall for it.
God damn it,
no,
Doobie.
no doubt that if you look at all the sort of, if you take the rise in mental illness and you take all these individual cases and you put them in a pie chart, no doubt a good chunk of these, I'll even concede, are going to be because we have new tools for diagnosis. But I don't think you can discount the possibility that perhaps there are also new problems in our society that are perhaps exacerbating mental illness. And I think in particular, you can't talk about underreporting when we look at the rise in terms of not just mental illnesses, but the effects of mental illnesses. If you look at, for example, the rise in self-harm and suicide, you can say, oh, a person with ADHD just sort of walked around in society, we just didn't know. But people who committed suicide do not walk around in society, and we do not know. And there has been a sharp rise rise in suicide, and this is actually universal among a lot of Western nations that seem to be a lot ahead of the curve in terms of the integration of our lives into the online space. So, Doobie, if you want to, I guess, what would your explanation be for these things, where it was not the case that we were sort of underreporting suicides or self-harm previously, I don't think, or anywhere to the extent that could explain the rise today?
The suicide rate, that could be lots of things. It could
It
be
could
as
be lots of
simple.
things. What do you think it is, though?
I think it is lots of things. I don't think it's we could say it's loneliness or social media or anything like
So
that.
it's mental health
It,
related.
yeah, mental health related. But I think you
Okay.
could. It's one thing that I'd point to, probably like the most prominent thing, especially like in recent years. If if people were to compare what their parents were able to do with the same amount of money, 30, 40 years ago, whatever the fuck, versus what they can buy now for the same money, same amount of work, it's make a lot of people feel like they're a failure. A lot of people feel like they're depressed, right? A lot of people feel like they're not going to amount to anything. Nothing that can, there's actually a, especially for people who grew up like who were getting into the workforce around the time of the like the financial crisis, right? A lot of those people feel like they're behind because they are behind, and they feel like they're never going to get ahead, and they're really depressed about it, right? Because they feel like they're the first generation that's going to do worse than their parents. Right? So I think that contributes a lot to it, and I would say that probably for men especially, that probably contributes the most to it.
Um,
Yeah, I was just gonna say, Doobie, I can agree that again, that's part of it, but I really don't think that the economic anxiety of these people is true. Because if anything, if you look at the growth of these mental illnesses, it is not among the extreme poor, where this would be most pronounced. It is actually more concentrated in the middle classes, around the people who actually, ironically enough, have the time to be on social media platforms and like that. And I think that you sort of set yourself in a bad position here, because I don't think you can really seriously make the argument that people's feelings about how bad the world is, particularly in relation to like the financial crisis or other things like global warming, isn't massively impacted by their perception of on social media, by doom scrolling. Part of the reason why people think that the world is so fucked, a lot of times a lot worse than it actually is because of social media, is because media loves to report all these sensational headlines that make the world seem way worse than it actually is. That's not to say these problems don't exist, but if you look at polling about this consistently, people think that the world is often way worse than it actually is. If you look, for example, issues like global warming or wealth inequality, these problems are real and they do exist. I don't want to downplay those, but people's perception of them are massively inflated by social media, by our news
I
cycle.
Yeah, I'd call that far more inflated by like the media and not just social media, but like the media generally, like
Wait,
all
Mr.
these
Camel.
and
Ju-
what's
Sorry,
the
Doobie.
fucking word I'm looking for,
Just
and like the news organizations who sensationalize these topics and use them to draw eyeballs, right? So they'll exaggerate the seriousness of crises and shit.
so, Mr. Camel, you brought up a good point. I mean, you said a lot of good things there, but what I really caught was that you were talking about how the poor people don't get mental health diagnosis, and that's probably a lot because they don't go to therapy. But then the middle class may be going to therapy a bit more as well too, and could be showing that as well. Not
That's
saying that's the whole issue, but you did say a lot of good points.
that certainly could be a bias, but my understanding, and I am not a mental health expert, if I'm proven wrong on this, I'll totally change my position, is that it does seem to be the case that mental health issues seem to be a lot more dense on a per capita basis among the middle class than the lower class. That's not to say that the poor middle class people, we should ignore the lower class people. I just meant to say that that seems to suggest that there's more going on than just an economic anxiety. But no, I do appreciate that point. That is a good thing to
Do-
sort of have in the back of your mind.
Can I add a little context here?
Go for it.
Do you want to know what it cost me to get a diagnosis?
I would
Oh,
love to.
Just shy of $20,000.
That's fucked up.
Yeah, so it's not that simple. There are a lot of poor people with mental illnesses that do not get diagnosed. Mine got
No doubt.
diagnosed because I wound up in the emergency room because I was up for 3 days having a manic episode and aiming a gun at a door. So it's not that simple. There are a lot of poor people that don't get diagnosed. They just get hauled to jail. I had the money to do it. So, and even if I didn't, I still got taken to the hospital and was lucky enough that nobody called the cops. That's
enough.
literally what it come down to. So, just to fill everybody in while we're on it, I have PTSD, which some of you probably could have pieced that together from that story, which to harken it, and I hate to rerail the whole topic here, but that's why I'm a fan of remote work. Just throwing that out there. For some people like me who have some issues with going outside some days, which is not always, and I do go to a therapist, which costs $150 an hour every week. Again, a lot of poor people can't afford that. Yeah, no, being in the house, being able to work, way more consistent, way easier to do. So like I said, we can get real quick. We can talk about like real life examples and how this affects individuals pretty quickly. So yeah, if it weren't for those types of things, I don't know where I would be. I probably wouldn't be talking to all of you. I'd probably be in a much worse situation than I am now. So I think it's I'm not pointing to anyone individually, but I think collectively we all have to kind of take a step back and remember that like mileage may vary, right? Like not everybody's going to get the same experience, and I can tell you firsthand that there are people that I was in the hospital with, and then transferred to a private mental health facility that were there that were currently under arrest with the state or with with a county, and most of them were there on detox. They didn't get diagnosis. They'd get anything. They would just be marked down as a detox, and they would get hauled off to jail as soon as they were cleared. I'm telling you, and to sit there and just be like, well, they're drug addicts. Believe me, the overlap of mental illness and drug addiction, more generally, is really severe. If you're poor, you're not getting it. It's just not happening in a lot of places. So I think we have to be a little bit more aware of that. I think it's a little bit bullshit to say, well, just go get diagnosed, bro. There's tons of people that don't. And there's tons of people I see that give themselves like cringe self-diagnoses all on Twitter, espousing like complete bullshit because they're like, oh, I am definitely borderline personality disorder. You're probably not, realistically, or you wouldn't have any friends. But that notwithstanding, it's not as simple as just going to your doctor, which a lot of people can't afford to even go to a doctor, and just saying, hey, I'm having some problems. Can you fix me? It takes a lot of diagnostics. You have to see a psychiatrist in most instances, and if you are I'm not on disability, but if you are in a position where you need to be on disability, it's an even more complicated, drawn out process, and it will involve you almost definitely, if you're at that state, to have friends or a family or some type of guardian or conservatorship or something going forward to get through that whole process, and not to mention an attorney who will take they'd usually take anywhere from a third to a half, something like that, of what you will get in the initial back pay of that disability. I can go on and on about this. So I just like these arguments are just bullshit. Like you guys, a lot of you are just saying things that you have no idea what you're talking about.
So let's go to. Not sure if you had your hand.
No, it's just moving.
No problem. But and people with BPD have friends. I don't know. People with BPD have friends.
The self-diagnosed ones that are making a mockery of it on Twitter are no. Okay, I'm just putting that out there.
So so then you're saying that people who don't have BPD don't have friends. Okay, even from saying people with borderline personality disorder don't have friends.
You shouldn't be.
I may have misspoke the way I phrased it. I'm sorry for that.
But is that discriminatory? If I say, hey, you probably shouldn't be friends with somebody with a BPD, it's probably discriminatory, but it's also good advice.
I don't know much about BPD, so but I can talk about a little bit about again to re-reel the conversation. So again, I'm not asking for remote work to be done away with entirely. I think there are times when it does make sense, and in your situation, I think it would. And having that as an option available for people who need it is entirely fine. And again, if we could do it in such a way that it didn't have these negative effects or the possibility to amplify the negative effects that we've seen from other sources, I'd be much more comfortable with it. But all I'm trying to say is that everyone's situation is different. Not everyone can just go out and socialize on their own. A lot of people need the socialization that comes from work and the office place. And I get that, again, it may be more financially helpful to the corporations to not have to invest in infrastructure and things like that. But again, we need social interaction face to face. And when we don't get that, we suffer. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, thank you. First off, just on Gothgash and Spirito Boy, I do think that is a really fair point that there's huge amounts of underreporting, and I do appreciate for bringing that up. And I would like to just reaffirm that once again, I do think there should be exceptions for chronically ill people or disabled people, 100%. And that's a great point to bring up. And also, just thank you for sharing your story. Uh, on Doobie's point, though, I agree that the media cycle is what is causing this. But where is that media cycle happening, Doobie? It's almost where is it that people are seeing these stories and are freaking out about them? It's almost exclusively on social media. What is the worst part of sensationalization? It's those clickbait headlines that people read and don't read the whole article. And where does it happen? Almost exclusively on social media. All the worst parts of this phenomenon are happening on social media, and not just because people happen to be on social media, but they actively utilize the features of social media. Right? Things like clickbait headlining or doom scrolling. These are things that cannot occur, and certainly not to the same extent can occur if you're just watching cable news or if you're just reading the newspaper. Social media is actively amplifying and making these things way worse. So even if I can't get you to agree with me sort of on social media writ large, can you at least see how this is one particular aspect where social media is undoubtedly massively having an impact that is negative on people's mental health when they think about how fucked the world is?
Yeah, but again, I think that's just a problem generally with news organizations sensationalizing the news. But I think that again, not the good, we want to avoid throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because in addition to the sensation, I can even say the word sensationalized shit, you become aware of shit that 20, 30 years ago they would have had no idea what was going on and what have happened in the shadows, and you'd hear about it 20 years later when the CIA like declassified it or whatever the fuck. Right now we can hear about this stuff. Now if there's some pipeline somewhere where people are getting hosed down in 10-degree weather, right? We can see it. It's going to be everywhere, and we're going to drive people there. We're going to drive interest there. We're going to drive donations, and people are going to go there, and it's going to have like a massive benefit, right, to those kind of movements and these kind of situations. Situation in Ukraine right now, the reason people give a fuck about it is because it's on social media, right? And the reason so much money is like independent money, private money is flowing to those people is because of social media, right? So again, we got to avoid throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
I 100% agree with you. I guess my problem is I don't really feel like I'm really advocating for throwing out the baby with the bathwater. I 100% agree that there are big benefits to social media, but I just feel like when it comes to specifically this issue of remote work, that the negatives outweigh the benefits at this particular point in time. I'm not saying you need to eschew remote work entirely or entirely. I'm for a hybrid model. I'm not saying that we couldn't eventually do this. But it's just when you talk, and I guess when you talk about news generally, it is news generally, but specifically news on social media that's doing it. Social media is enabling and massively amplifying this problem. If it wasn't for social media, things like doom scrolling or clickbait headlines would not exist anywhere to the same extent that they do now. So yes, it's news generally,
Right,
but
but
news generally is happening
come
on
on.
social media.
If it wasn't for social media, people who are interested in the news would just watch it like on channel 11 or whatever the fuck you have, and they'd get the same kind of crazy headlines.
No,
Yeah, but
I
that's
don't
not
think
true at
that's
all.
true.
Yeah, we
Absolutely
saw
true.
with the whistleblower, the lady that came from Facebook and testified before Congress, and she said basically Zuckerberg was running the algorithm to promote hate, and Trump got elected, type of thing. So he shifted the algorithm, he shut it off. Biden got elected, and then he turned it back on again. So you could fix the problem with the social media on the corporate side with that type of thing, but you also have to deal with the personal side. Parents got to raise their children well, along those types of things too. And I think Wick had an excellent point of that we do need social interaction face to face. Whether that happens in the office or out of the office is like a preference type of thing. And we've got to put some more things into work around that so that we're not arguing over whether we need to get our socializing in the office or not, but that it can actually get done instead.
If we could do that, I'd be 100% in favor. It just doesn't seem like anyone has any really good solutions that we can do right now as to address these massive problems of sort of degenerating friend groups or spikes in mental illnesses.
Well, one of the things that we could do, just quickly, one of the things that
You
we
know, go
can do is we're doing right here is we're talking about it more cohesively, or we're having more discussion about it, which involves more people and more people want to be a part of it. And that helps shift the social norms or the social acceptance of people being able to ask for help openly and not be criticized for it, or to actually seek help that's not seen as you being broken type of thing. Sorry, Please go on.
So do you think that if people so prior to like COVID especially, right? Do you think that there was like less doom scrolling and less people going to YouTube and shit and Facebook for their news? Because I feel like, prior to the whole work from home thing being something that lots of people were doing, this was still a thing people did, right? Even with the forced social interaction in the workplace. So I don't see why you're focusing on that when it doesn't seem like there was ever a solution to that problem if it even exists as a problem.
I don't think that preventing remote work is a solution to the problem. I think that it prevents the problem from getting worse.
Um, okay, how?
Because I think that if you eschew any sort of if you massively shift people away from physical work to remote work, that it just makes the problem worse. I think that this would be
You
that this
you
would
just
make the problem.
yeah,
Uh,
you repeated the thing you said that I asked you how. So like,
oh,
how
sorry,
does
I
it
misunderstood.
okay, like
I
how does it make it worse, right? Because I think in there you're there's the assumption that people who aren't getting social interaction from the workplace aren't going to seek it in other ways, right? And I mean in person in other ways, right? As if like most people have just their coworkers that they socialize with, and I
I think
don't
that
think that's the case.
it seems to be that people are increasingly not pursuing socialization. Um, Irregardless of whether it's in the workplace or not. So I think any area where we can increase in-person socialization is very important. That's not to say that there aren't some people who will use this free time to socialize, but I think there are people. I think there are undeniably
Could we agree that
a
it's a
big.
vast majority of people who would use their free time to
No,
socialize in person?
absolutely not. Absolutely
What
not.
where do you get that? Like, what indicates that to you? What
It
indicates
seems
to you that the vast majority of people are not having in-person social interaction?
not that they aren't having any in-person social interactions, but that people are having less and they are pursuing them less. And I would point to all of the. I know that they. And I know we don't want to fling studies back and forth at each other, but I think there are a lot of studies that talk about how people are having less friends, less romantic partners, less involved contacts, even less like associates. People that they would say like, "Oh, I'm not friends with them, but I know this person." It seems that people are increasingly using online platforms to avoid going in person, whether that's staying on Discord all day or using Uber Eats to never go to a restaurant and things like this. This just feels like almost undeniable. If we disagree on this, I don't think there's any way to move forward because we're just
Right,
having
but I think
fundamental disagreement about like the
I gotta
I
society
go,
that we
don't
live
gang.
in.
I'll
understand.
see you
I
guys
don't
later.
understand.
Bye bye.
I don't understand what
I
the problem is with that.
Take care, Wick. See you.
So what? Maybe people are more confident in understanding themselves and are more comfortable with themselves than they've been in the past. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it is a good thing that you're comfortable enough with yourself that you don't need to seek out social interaction from others. Like, why do we always view this as a negative?
Usually because if you're not,
Solitude can be good for people, you know.
well,
Because
I
people
usually
agree
not
because
with a
seeking
lot of it.
socialization are usually a minority in the population. Most people want to congregate and socialize.
There's a
Well,
reason
not
why
that, not
solitary confinement is used as a punishment.
listen, not that there isn't a time and a place, or that people shouldn't at some point seek to socialize, but because there's a degradation in people's need or desire to socialize, does not mean that there's functionally an issue here, right? Like, because what we have to say
no,
is,
it does.
hold on though, hold on, does it, or have we been too
It does.
reliant on others? And are we at a place where
No.
we are more comfortable with who we are as individuals, that we don't necessarily always have to rely on others to validate ourselves? Because
We
that's what
are
we're doing when we socialize.
we are literally at this point in human history the most intertwined people that have ever existed. So the idea of like solitude bringing us making us more efficient is factually wrong based upon like how we are cooperating as of right now, right? In between like national trade between nations, in between cooperation between nations, it becomes vastly
Nothing
important
to
that
do
you
with your mental health. You're talking about institutions. Sure, that works as on an institutional level. Of course it
which
does.
then
The
when we go
mechanisms of
into
society, sure.
which when
But
then
when we're
when we go
individuals,
into
we don't
how we are
necessarily do that.
working within our families to create tight-knit social environments, not only just within families but your friends too, doesn't mean that you have to have 24 friends. What we want to try and ensure is that you have 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 actually solid people that you can feel that you can rely on. I don't
For
necessarily
you, Red, Yes, for you, definitely, I can see that as being important. But for Longbeard over there, he's saying he wants to be a bit more autonomous with how things work and so forth. And that seems to be a smaller portion of the population.
Right, of
So you're
course.
you're talking two different needs there as well too. So I
Well,
just want
yeah,
to
We're
point that
talking
out
like a
to
we're
yeah,
talking
but the
about like
reason
a
why it
dramatic.
becomes
We're talking about like
important
5%
the
or
reason
less.
why the reason why it becomes important is because then you have to exercise, those people still have to exercise within themselves, within the community, a
right, right.
community. In this, in my case that I'm trying to point out, is like usually governance, right? Like if you don't if you're a highly individualistic individual, that's fine, there's not going to be a ton of you out there, but it can become problematic when we talk about, um, coming together on some big social issues or coming together in moments of crisis, right? That's
Socialist,
why it
by the
becomes
way.
important.
I want to be clear
Yeah,
about that.
yeah.
I'm very much in the socialist fucking ideology. So it's not that I negate the need for us to come together on things. I just don't think that we necessarily have to do it IRL. I think there's other avenues in which we can pursue
Yeah.
those same interactions that don't
Hmm.
necessarily involve traditional ways that we've done it in the past. And I think currently, like, so I come from a tech background. I work in tech and I do pretty well for myself. I work from home and I am totally content with that. As far as social interaction goes, of course I still have that. But my social interaction then becomes on my terms, not on the terms of a business or a school
Exactly.
or somebody else.
Right.
I get to decide what my social interaction
Right.
level is going to be. I get to make those decisions. And can we say that maybe when people are left to their own to make those decisions, that sometimes some groups are going to make those decisions less than others? And maybe that's part of the reason that we see a downtick in people wanting to socialize with others because they don't have to.
I just gotta say, I'm gonna dip out. It was great talking to you guys. I'll see you all
Have a good
later.
one,
Okay.
See you,
Brento.
Brento.
See ya.
Bye.
Take care.
See you later.
Yeah, and again, I think that kind of speaks to the point of like you want to make sure that those are of value, right? Like you brought up the point of like a lot of the things of like our social groups at work, at in-person work, seem a lot forced, or it can have a lot of negative effects for the business when you deal with that contention that can become like hyper focused or very toxic, right? So it looks like, at least from what I've been trying to advocate for, is it looks like if you limit those interactions to like strictly work and some side conversation if they enjoy one another on an individualistic level, I don't believe that they are not going to then, outside of their job, seek out people because they are trapped at home with their job. I feel like, to me, it feels natural to then want to get out of the house to interact with people, right? But the contention is like, we seem to be a highly isolistic kind of group as of now, how we're interacting with social media. So, how do we know what may feel natural to me is necessarily what's going to happen? I say that it feels natural, therefore it will happen. Others are saying, well, we have this huge kind of like, huge fucking like species changing device, aka social media. If we all agree that those more interpersonal, real life situations are like better, those friendships are better, is it necessarily the fact that those are going to get established more because of social media? It may look like people feed into this machine more than actually valuing those. I would say that I don't think that would be the case. It feels more natural, but there seems to be like an argument, and there's some data to back it up.
I don't think also when it comes to work environments, like forcing people into what could possibly be a toxic work environment as a means of creating a social interaction is necessarily a good thing. I mean, speaking from like experience, like where I work and whatnot, like I work with about 40 people. 5 of them I get along with pretty well. 2 of them I actually enjoy interacting with. The majority of them, not really. As a matter of fact, even like today, what is it? The 2 people that I normally interact with the most, they weren't there today. No one basically spoke to me all day. I was just literally in the room, but nobody spoke to me. I don't necessarily consider that a good social interaction for spending a long period of time at work in a social environment, and I didn't get anything out of the social experience from that. So I don't necessarily see work as a means of it could possibly be a means, but it not necessarily the only means that we should be forcing people into to force social interactions.
I agree with that.
Ubi, ask a question. I'll go to Wick, and Wick kind of like passed it, unfortunately. I don't remember what it was. I think it was about like mental, basically about how we should accommodate people. Interesting.
I should accommodate people.
Whether we shouldn't accommodate, or where these social habits come from, or something like that.
Where is
Yeah.
the
Oh,
loneliness
yeah.
coming
Yeah.
from?
Because a lot of what I think Wick was saying, and I think some of what Flow Trace is saying, is that people will not socialize on their own. A lot of people are choosing not to do this, so forcing them to do it through the workplace, right, is beneficial. It's better than no social interaction at all. Right. So what I was asking is, where do you think that comes from? Right. So where does this desire not to socialize that you guys think people have? Where do you think that comes from?
I think a big
I
part of
talk-
it. Or sorry, go ahead, Desperate.
When I was saying in the beginning, I think people have gotten used since basically the age of the internet to being extremely candid online, and that candid nature in people, like in front of what is it like on this panel or whatnot, and how we interact with people on social media and whatnot. That candid nature that we have there, we can't necessarily have that same exact candid nature in real life, in like a face-to-face communication with people. And I think people prefer that more than trying and more than running the risk of making trouble, in essence, for themselves in those social interactions in real life. Because I would say that like if Doobie and I were to meet up and have a conversation, I don't think our conversation would be anywhere near the kind of conversation we'd have on this panel.
I don't think we'd be talking very much at all, especially
Right.
after I got a couple glasses of wine into you.
Right.
I think that social media is very akin to a drug, and people want to do it even though it's not good for them, and this starts to subsume other parts of their life. I think that it's very addictive, it's very toxic, and when people have an avenue in their life that's very addictive but toxic, they will start to sort of give up other avenues of their life to pursue that one because it is addictive. I think that's one of the big ones, but not the only.
Yeah, but like I just don't. If that is the case, and I don't know what society does in response.
Me
Like,
too.
if social media is all those things, right? Also, before that, people complained about video games. Right? But like before this was video games. Before that, well, I don't know.
Movies, music,
Music.
Or comic books, right? It's like this great social wheel. It seems like it requires an adjustment, right? Like if it's the case, then it seems like it only requires an adjustment. Then society is fine. It seems like the people who have difficulty socializing will gravitate to the things that allow them to not deal with face to face, right? Like those will always be people like that, and they'll move to those. And they're not the only people who get involved in these things, obviously, right? People who love social media, love video games or whatnot, right? There's a wide range of people who do that, but it seems like endemic that we will have a class of individuals who will shun like traditional relationships, right, and look for other mediums to interface with people. And I think overall, it's a good thing. I feel like right now we're becoming those parents, right? What was that guy's name? Jack, not Dorsey. Jack. He was a lawyer who was trying to like ban video games. Jack.
Jack Dempsey.
Not Dempsey. Jack.
Who's Jack Dempsey?
I
Jack
know.
Dempsey's a boxer.
Yeah.
From like the 1900s.
It's Jack. Someone's gonna know who I'm talking about. In any case, like I feel like we're like that like those people.
Jack Thompson. Like they did the
Thank
googling.
you.
That dude, yeah.
Jack Thompson. Thank you
Thank you,
so
God.
much. Yes. I think we are like that at this moment. If we're saying, well, social media is so bad, it's just Oh, and something needs to be done. Doobie, Dustin.
Um, yeah, so I think that just kind of because I think maybe I can definitely relate with what I'm about to say, of course, because I experienced it, but I'm sure lots of you can too, right? If you're not really feeling into social interaction, but you were kind of forced to be at a party anyway because you told your friends you'd be there, whatever the fuck. So you're kind of lurking in the corner, avoiding people, you know, what's the word? Cradling your beer and waiting until you have an excuse to get the fuck out of there, right? I think the kind of people that you're talking about, Prime, that's how they are in the workplace, right? They don't actually want to socialize there. They keep to themselves, right? They do the work, they keep their head down, and then they go the fuck home when they go home when they can, and they get on Discord and they play video games, right? Because they don't want to fucking socialize in the workplace. Fuck that, right? It's not for them. And I think it's totally fine, right? If and I like this saying that, hey, how do we accommodate these people? I think we are, right? I think things like Discord accommodate those people because if they'd rather have the social interaction online, I think that's okay for some people. I think it's fine. And and if they get to the point where, hey, I haven't interacted with a human being in like 2 months, then they can cross that bridge and they can go out and find something to do in the real world, right? Like I don't, and I think lots of them do. Um, I don't know if there's
I,
anything really gained from like forcing those people who are just like introverted a lot of the time, out of their shells, quote unquote, right? Forcing them to be something that they don't want to be because it's more in line with what you think people should behave like.
tend to agree with you, and mostly because having been like having to work in a professional environment and then go out and sing and try to make my way in a metal band, which I did for 13 years. Like, I don't want everybody that I work with necessarily jumping into what I'm doing with my band, right? Because maybe some of the shit I'm doing with my band is objectionable to them. So when I go to work, like my work is not my place for where I want that social interaction. I have another avenue for that. My avenue is not through work because, well, number one, I was taught from when I was very young, don't dip your pen in the company ink. So I'm not looking to date anybody at work. And number two, like, why would I want to go drink with a bunch of people from work who could turn around and use that against me at work? Like, there's a lot of reasons, like, why I wouldn't want to socialize at work, especially at work, because I don't want these motherfuckers knowing anything about me. Go ahead and look. I live in a right to work state, man. They can fire me for any fucking reason they want. Like, I don't want them knowing shit about me. As far as I'm concerned, I'm gonna go and do my job and collect my paycheck, and I'm gonna go home and party the fuck out with all my friends and have barbecues and do the shit that I do with the people that I love and care about. Like, and those are people that aren't at my fucking job. That's for fucking damn sure. Maybe I might pick up a friend there. Maybe there's somebody that I'll end up having a common interest. Maybe they have a flyer on their desk or they mention a movie or something like that, and we end up having that conversation. There's an organic friendship that builds, but that's very few and far between, and I think a lot of people feel that same way, especially like, I mean, you know uh in my situation, having been a single parent for so long, I don't want a whole lot of people interacting in my life. Like, I need to be very selective about who comes in my door and shit. Maybe the reason that I'm not wanting to socialize at work has nothing to do with me being an antisocial person, but has everything to do with me wanting to protect and maintain my income.
Mm-hmm. Let's go, Dustin.
Kind of just like two things. Uh, I think we're on agreement that we're intensely, social creatures, and one of the things that we've done to like work with this is the fact that we created governments, right? Well, this seems a little bit weird because we've created this giant social experiment, but now it's kind of like controlled by one to two different companies, right? Like, you have this giant wealth of society. And by wealth, I mean just like a bunch of people, not necessarily like wealth that they are generating, but like you have this giant wealth of society. And now we as gamers, we understand like how to navigate, or we have understood how to navigate, not always in the correct way, but we get this idea of like there are different ways that you interact within this sort of group, right? Like League of Legends players have different modicums of interactions than Dota players, or vice versa, right? So we have all these unique tribes that are able to interact or
compete against one another for those interests, but you still see a want and a need for that social interaction on something that is incredibly fucking new and very unfounded and very it's starting to get some guardrails, but we can talk about whether or not those seem efficient. Doesn't look like they are. But the second part, what really worries me about people that are very apprehensive on the like, well, hold on, we just need to throw the brakes on this working from home stuff. There are going to be social consequences that we may not know. The problem is, at least for America, we work in a very capitalist nation, and it's important to remember that capital, if they see this happening and they agree that this is going to be a huge moneymaker, they're going to do what they can to maximize it within the realms of the law. So if you're one of the people that's just saying, no, wait, hold on, it's not no, wait, hold on. It needs to be like, let's figure out how we can make this work, right? Let's make sure that companies aren't able to like break into your computer systems, aren't forcing you to sit in front of a camera so they can verify where your eye tracking your eyes on your monitors, right? Like it's important to get these regulations and these worker rights in place before, you know, a normal social work culture becomes a normal abusive social work culture becomes a corporate standard. I think that's what worries me. That if you don't recognize how out of hand this can get, and you're just saying we need to pump the brakes, that's not necessarily what's going to happen.
Yeah, I think we're coming pretty close to looping on this topic, but I guess I can just sort of respond to a couple specific points. I do think there are some people that will always be antisocial, Doobie and Prime. You're absolutely correct that there's always going to be some people. But of all the people that are currently antisocial right now, it's not the case that like 98% of the people who are currently antisocial are these permanently antisocial types. I think if anything, it's the opposite, where I think there's a big chunk of people in society that are not antisocial because of who they are, but because we live in a society right now that seems to be exacerbating antisocial tendencies. There is no doubt that there are some people that can work with this, that can work, who can make remote work for them, who would be net benefited in the net by being able to work remotely, and if in fact would probably be affected in the net negative if we force them to socialize at work. But I'm okay with that because it's my belief that there are far more people who will be effective in a net positive by forcing them not to either use a hybrid model and still come to the office at some point and get that socialization. If it was the case that we could have people socialize outside of work, I'd be fine with that. But the problem is that this is not what is currently happening. There are a lot of people who are not socializing outside of work, and work is some of the only socialization they get. And it's bad socialization. I agree with all of that. But the problem is that I would much rather have them get some of that bad socialization at their work than just throw that socialization out and have none left at all. I think just
so that would be better if they got bullied at work. If they had the social interaction of getting bullied at work as opposed to no social interaction. Is that what you're saying?
Or
no,
being ignored all day and basically having zero social interaction. You're just
No,
with
not
people in the
necessarily.
same
I
room.
think there are going to be individual cases where
There
it
is a
is
social
going to be a
interaction
net.
of
It is going to be some
ignorance.
cases where it's going to. There are going to be some cases where it's going to be a net negative, that social interaction. But we don't legislate or talk about societal change off of individual cases. What we talk about is what is going to happen to most people, and it is my belief that most people would benefit from socializing at work versus doing fully remote work and not doing that. If we have extension of that, we can talk about that.
What about people with families? Don't you think that working at home has actually brought families closer together?
Some people are going to benefit more from remote work. Yes.
That's well, I mean, the preponderance of the country are people who in some way have families, whether that's have children of their own or are children or live with family members who they have close ties to. Like
I don't think that's the case of the preponderance of the country for people that are working in offices where they're going to be remotely working necessarily. I don't know if that's the case. I would be surprised if
I
anybody
have
has
to
that
hop
stat
off here,
offhand.
so I will talk to you
Have
all
a good
later.
one,
Take care.
Desperado.
Bye-bye.
Okay. I mean, but you recognize that there is a large populace of people that live with family and have seen a net positive because of their ability
Yes,
to
there's a
interact.
large populace of almost everything in a country of 300 million. My question is the percentages. Am I going to help more people than hurt by doing this? If yes, then I'll do it.
Well, don't you think it's the company's decisions to decide that anyways?
Oh yeah, no, yeah, absolutely. I'm not talking about I'm saying this is what companies should do and what I hope they do. I'm not all advocating for legally banning remote work or anything like that. Absolutely.
But do you think that I mean, obviously, not every business model is going to fit the same, right? I mean,
Yeah,
especially
of
if you're
course. Yeah,
working
of course. That I'm sure there in a country of 300 million, there's going to be some businesses where actually my argument falls apart. But I think for most businesses, most people are going to be benefited. Yes.
Do you know that a lot of businesses do like Zoom happy hours and stuff like that, and have
Yes.
social interactions through video conference and things like that?
Yes. But I don't think that comes anywhere close to the social. I don't
That
think
sounds
that
worse than going
most
to a bar
people.
for me. Even on like the worst days I'm having, that sounds decidedly worse.
All my coworkers are literally all the way across the country from me, literally as far across the country from me as they could possibly fucking get. And I have had so much fun in happy hours getting trashed with them on Zoom. I can't tell you. Like,
Yeah, that's
we
awesome.
fucking have a fucking blast. So it does happen. It it very much does
Yeah,
happen.
I agree. It does happen.
I
I'm
think
not concerned with whether or not it
I think
happens in
there's a
cases. I'm
misconception
concerned with
that
the.
because everybody's working from home that just nobody ever wants to get out or nobody wants to have interactions with their coworkers. Like I said, I typically wouldn't have done that. If I were going into the office, I wouldn't have done that happy hour with them. I laid out quite clearly why I wouldn't have done that. But
Yeah,
because
I get that.
because we're in a virtual environment, it's very controlled. I can fucking close out that meeting when I'm done and be done with it. And you know what? Why is that a bad thing? Like,
I
I,
don't like.
you can have that
I don't know how many
tactile
times
interaction.
I'm gonna have to repeat myself. I agree that there are gonna be cases where remote work actually is good. I'm for a hybrid model. I'm for specific people like those that are chronically ill or disabled being able to do remote work. But my concern is not that there are some cases where remote work is good. My concern is that there are more remote cases where remote work is bad.
I'll say it. I'll say it. We need the data. I mean, we need data to like back that type of thing up. I mean, if that's just a gut feeling, that's fine. I'm not arguing that. But like,
Yeah, well,
we need some evidence for that, wouldn't we?
I yes, I think that there is evidence. I don't think that it's a good idea to like try and dive into studies in front of a panel. Frankly, I'm kind of surprised that people disagree that there seems to be an increasing degeneration of social circles, particularly with young people, and that seems to be driven by our presence online and social
No,
media.
as a direct. I mean, as a direct result of like remote work. That's what I was saying. I think that.
Well, I
that's
think
what
it
I
goes
was
without
asking.
saying. I think we all agree that it goes without saying. And as Doobie pointed out earlier, that when you are remote working, you're going to have social media or YouTube on another monitor, and you're going to be increasing your online presence. So it seems to just sort of go hand in hand.
Online presence considered
Maybe.
social interaction to you.
Maybe.
It is a kind of social
I
interaction, but it's not
actually
the good kind.
well, first I'm gonna admit something to you guys. Okay, so I've been speaking this entire time as like from the perspective of healthy doobie, right? A healthy social interaction doobie, right? A mix of online and in real life thing, which is like where I am when I'm healthy, right? But I've had times, and over like COVID especially, where literally like 90% of my interaction with human beings was online, was Discord, right? Um, and just because COVID, so I couldn't go out and hang out with my friends in real life, like my normal friends in real life. We couldn't find shit to do. Then I was actually paranoid about getting COVID, because I had like 3 people in my family die from it. So I didn't want to go to their houses a lot of the time. So I was just at home, I'd play some video games, watch some movies, talk to people on Discord, and that's just my social interaction. And I found that like, um, I'm generally like I guess I'd call myself like an omnivert, right? So like um, I think I'm like naturally introverted, but when I'm in a social setting, I can become very very extroverted, right? Um, so yeah, I didn't see it as like a big like detriment to me. I think because I'm totally fine being on my own anyway. But I know of people who were in the same place that I was, 90% of the social interaction online, and who was not a healthy thing for, right? And they were stuck, right? And they would have like breakdowns and fucking panic attacks and all that, because and all this kind of shit, right? Even if they thought it's what they wanted, they lost perspective, right? And I think it's easy to do when you're like stuck on social media. You lose perspective, and what some jackass in Sweden said about your Twitter comment, right, is like the most important thing in the world to you, right? Like nobody else gives a fuck, right? 10 people saw it, nobody cares, right? but it's like the most important thing to the world. And on Discord, I see it all the time on my Discord server. So there are lots of people like this on my Discord server who get so fucking wrapped up in like roles and ranks on the server and the memes that they're allowed to post, and oh god, this guy said this to me, and oh, this mod muted me for 2 minutes, and oh my god, it was so unfair. They freak the fuck out, right? It's not healthy all the time. I think you can lose perspective, and you need to have a mix, right? You need to like be aware of where you are mentally when you're engaging with these things.
So
So
but
yeah, so yeah, I think yeah, just I don't want to seem like I'm like totally unaware of like the downsides of some social media if that's all you're doing, right? Um, that being said, I do need to go for a bit. I'll be back later if you guys are still hanging around after the stream. But I need to run off for like 20 minutes.
Thank you, DB.
yeah.
Yeah,
I
see you
think
later.
Bye.
that's good, buddy.
Bye.
That was a good one, too.
I think that's super interesting. Oh, also, like, Smash for open. If you guys want to join? Still, it's an open chat. I'm much like Doobie, in that I'm, I guess, an omnivert, and I can do both pretty easily.
Oh, I thought you were going to say rich or good looking, but
Oh,
omnivert. Okay.
neither of those. Clearly
We
not.
can already tell that he's good looking.
Well, subs to the channel if you want to get me right? Sub, get bits or gift subs. If you're
There
enjoying
you
this
go.
community,
Yeah.
this content, help us out. But I, so I have a similar outlook, and I was fine. I was and am fine on my own, right? So like I've been on my own for a lot longer than COVID, and I've okay. I don't need that level of interaction. I've been like, I've gotten a lot more socialization from Twitch, right? And still, it's like only so much I get. But even then, when I had even less than that, I was fine. But I recognize other people aren't. I recognize that other people going through the same thing. It is torture for them. Like not having, I've like hearing their stories about not be able to do the same things that they used to, right? Like being at home and maybe with their partners, maybe not with a partner, right? That it eats at them. I definitely have nothing but sympathy for them. I but that's a temporary state of affairs. One that will be rectified eventually, slowly as now. People are going out, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, that's a separate conversation. But people are going out and getting involved. But it seems to me that it seems to me that part of the problem uh, is that we're mixing two groups, right? There's a group that um uh, that is part of this is temporarily inconvenienced by our current state of affairs, right? And then there's another group that wants to separate because of like the benefits of remote work and how that would be in their lives, right? How that would work well in their lives. And there's another group that wants to separate permanently, right? It's not that remote work has any advantages. It's not that social media has an overwhelming number of advantages for them. It's just that I kind of don't want to. I don't want to. I feel like the people who've appeared on this panel talked about it have all fall somewhere along those groups, maybe others that I hadn't named. And then when we're talking about this, we kind of mix them all into one, and it makes it difficult because then someone will say, "Well, then my experience is different from that." My experience,
That's it exactly.
yeah, yeah. So it's and it confuses the conversation, right? So yeah, everyone has a different experience. Everyone has a different perspective that they're looking at this, but there are distinct groups that are suffering or sorry, experiencing the same thing, right? Experiencing the same conditions anyway.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, um, there are some people where the isolation kills them. I get that. Like, and I agree with you that like for some people, COVID was really, really bad for them. People that really depend on that socialization or need that interaction on a regular. There was a point in my life where when I was much younger, I probably would have fallen into that. I probably would have much more issues with that. But I think I've gotten older and like my need for that social interaction has changed a little bit. But yeah. As a matter of fact, I think younger people probably do on a mental wellness level suffer a little more from having to be pulled away from a social situation. Um, and I feel like they lose a little bit of their life in it with what's happening in COVID in general. I don't think that's necessarily grounded to the workplace. I think that that's the lockdowns and everything that's happened. Restaurants and clubs and everything closing down, even our ability to go to concerts and festivals and all those kinds of things. So I don't think that it's like a workplace thing as much as it's just been a societal awareness of us needing to take care of our collective health. And through that, unfortunately, the byproduct has been that um, some people's ability to interact socially, where there normally would have been normal growth out of that, has been inhibited. Um, but I think that yeah, like, to your point, there are several different groups uh, that have been affected in different ways. Some people really thrive in this atmosphere, like myself. Right now I'm thriving in it, but that doesn't. There's no you know, one fit solution.
You got it
I def-
exactly, Prime. You understand it very, very well, the dynamics of the conversation happening there. And it's one of the things that I've really had to learn hard how to pay attention to in conversations. And I've come to understand it like the big five personality types as it overlays on like the MBTI personality types. So you've got the introverts and extroverts type of thing going on. And if you've got introverts and extroverts in the same room and they start arguing over their needs on which needs are right, you're going to have a losing conversation because you got different needs that are being met. And basically, from those studies and from the things that we've seen people take those tests and so forth, you've got like 80% of the population that is kind of passive a bit. A true extrovert that goes out and lives and does that is a bit more rare. So yeah, I always try to take that into account when I'm watching the conversations happen.
I just want to ask, like, why it is that, like, I don't see what the division is here so much, because like so many of these jobs that are going remote are jobs that have the ability to go remote, while so many aren't, right? So if you're truly that extroverted and you wanted to go get a job that isn't, if that's your inclination, that could be an option, right? In most fields, right? There's always going to be some option to have some job in an office or out working in a factory, whatever it is that you're so inclined to do. Um, but I still will go back to, like, if we put everything in a pros and cons sheets, I think that the pros of remote work are so strong that if the only like dramatic con we're seeing is that extrovert people are going to be sad about it and have some issues socializing, then I would say that a remedy needs to be worked up for that, as opposed to just eliminating remote work or eliminating it or something of
Well,
that nature,
here's
because it doesn't make a lot of sense to me that we would give up all the benefits.
Well, here's part of the problem with that is that if the extroverts tend to be the leaders in our society because they like get shit done and talk and do stuff, so they'll impose their will upon the masses. And then you've got, well, okay, so we have to take care of both sides of it. Even though the extroverts tend to be a smaller portion of the society, they're equally as important as the masses. So when you balance out and work something out between the two groups, then you've got more productivity and people make more money and a lot of people are more happy.
I don't think that's inherently equal. So I think that the people that might be let's just assume that's true. Let's just say all people in leadership positions are extroverted. I'll give you that. I don't care. I think
Yeah,
that, like,
that's fine. It was just a generality. But
I know,
go
but
ahead.
I'm just saying we'll assume that. And I don't have a problem with assuming it. If we go with that, we still have the economics of it, and I have yet to hear any economic ramification for putting people into a physical space, because it like the cost is tremendous. Like the cost of having office space, the cost of having, like, if the company has parking, like just any of these things, it is so expensive and so unnecessary. Especially so many of these jobs that are remote now will require you to have your own computer, your own equipment. Like,
Right.
so they're offloading all of that cost, so they don't have to have They don't have to have the whatever servers on site they might have to have. They don't have to have the computers, the desks, the chairs. They don't have to have a lease in some building. They don't have to have any of that shit. It's all gone. So I think, as extrovert as those people might be, they still are going to see the economic benefit of it, and not to mention they can widen their pool of hiring talent. You can start hiring people from all across the country, all over the world, if you're so inclined to do so, and it just doesn't, like, there's no
Well,
fiscal like
Goth,
counter
Goth,
to it.
that was kind of part and parcel of the point that I was trying to address about the importance of regulation. If you want to check the VC chat, that video that I had posted actually goes through. It's a Vice piece, goes through and talks about the problems that that this one specific town had that ended up starting to alienate and price out citizens that had originally lived there, gone to high school, grew up out of their own neighborhoods, out of their own homes. They can't afford to find, housing in that area now because a bunch of people from, I think the actual place was like New York, came out there to live in that part of like rural-ish Colorado to do their work, and it just causes prices to, like, on housing and everything else, to really skyrocket. Like, there are going to be negative benefits outside of even like how our power infrastructure works. Like, you're going to have to figure out new tax codes, right? Like, you're going to have to figure out, there's going to need to be some a fair amount of legislation that goes into this idea.
Oh, I think you're right. I think there's definitely gonna be some unintended consequences, but I think that on the business side of it, like fiscally, it's just going to make sense for the business. I think that's going to be number one.
Yeah,
And
and that's
we live in America,
Yeah.
so that's what's
yeah,
going to take precedence, like
and
over
that's
everyone else.
and
Yeah,
that's
Yeah,
what
I
I
don't think
agree.
scares
there's
me
I don't
so
think
I
there's
much.
any
agree.
points against what you're saying, Goth. The economic position is rock solid. It's just the other part of like keeping more people happy type of stuff. But would it be better generally overall to go to remote work? Yeah, probably.
Well,
Yeah,
no,
yeah.
but this becomes functional, is what I'm saying. Like, downright to function, like how governments operate, how some states don't collect an income tax at all. And if you've got people that are, in there and they are spending money, within that area, yeah, that may be good, but the state may not see a lot of that revenue, or they may not be seeing enough. Right? I talk about a big idea of like how this will decentralize people that go to cities, these large cities, because that's where most of the economic wealth and opportunity is. Of course, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be distributed correctly or in an efficient manner, right? Like, it becomes very problematic if you don't have that groundwork.
If you're
Yeah.
if you're like of this like worker mindset, right? Like you sound very pro worker to me. Um, I I would suggest, right, like, wouldn't the ability to hire from all over the place and also the ability to get hired from all over the place be a net positive for worker mobility, which is a huge issue for workers' rights, anyways? If you can choose to work in for a company in a space that maybe they have to abide by legislation that the state that you're native to doesn't have to, or your ability to make more money because you work for a company, say, out of Florida, even though you live in, say, Oklahoma,
Yeah.
where the cost of living is a little bit lower. I mean, this is the ability that we now create when you have a work from home situation like that economically.
Yeah, it could, but again, like what I'm talking about is like some of that legislative infrastructure. Like, let's pretend somehow we get past like the actual power issues or like all of those sort of things, which are things that we need to address anyways. So we could say that we knock those out from a legislative point of view. Like I was saying, like some states don't have like actual income tax, right? Like, they're not going to be generating the same amount of revenue that they may need to put in some of this infrastructure. Now, I'm a big federal guy, so I can envision an entire national reworking. I don't think that would be a problem necessarily, but there are going to be legislative issues. I think Goth brought it up, or somebody brought it up about like companies starting to like track their workers on their own work computers on like even eye tracking software, right? Like, a lot of this sounds and seems a little Minority Report, like future crime or and stuff like that. But like,
to say that it's not going to be an issue, to say that like somehow we're going to allow people to work at home and they're going to have better worker rights, they may be like able to do things better for their home life, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to 100% inherit worker rights that will be vastly better than what they have now. That's what worries me. That if you don't have this groundwork, if you aren't having these conversations with people, or if your legislators don't understand the scope of the problem and how bad it's going to get out of hand, you're going to be behind capital, and that can be abusive.
People have worked from
I'm
home
going
for
to
well
take
over
off.
20
Everybody have a
years.
good night.
Above
Yeah,
and
man.
beyond, and before COVID happened. I
Oh
mean,
yeah, of course.
there's loan officers and people who work in real estate and people who
Yeah,
work in
sure.
all sorts of industries
Yeah.
that have worked from home like entirely their whole career for like I said, well over 20 years. I mean,
Sure.
I had friends when I was a kid whose their parents were computer programmers or were
Mhm.
responsible for network security that worked from home
Yeah.
and were able to manage a lot of that stuff through remote access even back then. So I don't necessarily think that this is something new where there's got to be a whole lot of new infrastructure built. It seems like we've already built it. It seems like it's been there. We've been using it for a long time. It's just there's more people now involved in that than there were
Well,
previously.
yeah, and that becomes incredibly important, right? Like we talk about this infrastructure like it's already built. There are areas there are several states that don't have this same infrastructure throughout their entire state, right? It's again this concentration of economic power. That becomes problematic if you want to talk about like spreading the wealth, if you want to talk about like eliminating this concentration of people here and spreading it out more, so you've got a little bit more of like a unifying codifying like nation. Like there are a lot of issues in in a sense of infrastructure that do and will need to be addressed for capital just to like get ahead of this.
Sure, and
And
I would agree that the expansion needs to happen, but to say that the structures aren't already there, I think is a mistake. I think that
Well,
the
I'm not
structures
saying
are
that they're
there.
not. I'm
There,
saying that
there
they are
should be,
concentrated.
of course,
I'm
there's
saying that they're concentrated.
need to be expanded. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
of course.
my point.
Yeah.
I think I think I definitely can relate to what you guys are saying, and especially sort of Dustin's side point here about how, irregardless of what we want to do, this is coming and we got to get ready. And
Yeah.
outside of sort of the benefit to workers and businesses, there's a lot of like legislative stuff we need to work on. But I guess it's just the thing I keep fundamentally coming back to is I do agree there are different groups. If I was God and I could like just tell who is remote work going to be healthy for, is going to work for, great, let's let those people remote work. I guess my problem is that I feel like the people who remote work is going to be unhealthy for are going to opt into it, and there's a lot more of those people than the other. I guess the thing that I guess I would sort of end on is that I think, and I hope I'm wrong, but I think that like many other things, COVID did not really create this problem as much as it exacerbated an underlying problem that had been festering for a long time and lurking. And then instead of seeing the problem sort of subside as COVID does, it will only grow. And as it becomes stronger, so too will become more public, and that's something we have to confront and solve. And I really do think that sort of the death of the social fabric, particularly among young people, and especially among young men, is something that is not talked about enough, and is something that is really flying under the radar as a major problem for our society. And we are gonna reap the rewards of letting this problem go unsolved if we do.
I don't know. I don't. I guess that's like part that do be pushing back on, and part that I guess I'm pushing back on. At the rewards, right? Like to say that there's gonna be some big. I I don't see that. I mean I see that there will be consequences, but for anything, for any social ill, there'll be consequences. It's just that is it enough? Of a Is it enough of a problem that should require a response that should drastically change how we interact with social media or remote work? I guess that's like focus. Like that's the question.
I would say that would warrant allowing disabled and chronically ill people to fully work remotely and let other people do a hybrid model. I don't think that's big. It's that big of an ask.
Well, it's barely an ask then. I mean, if that's all there is, that like some people should work hybrid. I mean, I guess. But then,
Right on. Well, welcome aboard, Prime.
well,
Well, it
but
just
that,
doesn't seem like much of an argument, is what we're saying, Flo.
yeah, and also like um, and this is what DB was getting at before. I To an individual, well, to a business owner, like, uh, how concerned should you be, right? Like it seems like some will be in a position to offer hybrid working conditions. Others might not, or they may be able to, but the money that they'd have to spend, it's not worth it. Either providing office space or providing the IT infrastructures allowing for remote work, right? And then to ask them, well, do both because that fits people's lives better. It's like, well, if you don't like what I offer as an employer, well, that's fair. I'll find another workplace. That's that seems to be like the best answer there. Like if I'm an
Yeah,
employer,
I do think it is essentially a race to the bottom. I don't think it. I hope companies do this, but I don't think it's going to be the case that companies are going to prioritize sort of the mental health well-being of their employees when it comes to balancing whether or not remote work is good for them. I think Dustin and Jason and Gothgash are all right on the money. The businesses are going to make a very harsh calculation that's probably going to come up with something like, holy shit, look at all the expenses we can cut if we let our workers work from home, and then they're just going to cut it all. But I just worry that that is going to have a lot of negative externalities. You know, I would hope companies don't use sweatshops, but I don't think we can rely on them to make that decision. Not to say that this is as bad as sweatshops, to be clear.
you should say that now.
I think, but
Yeah,
Be a sharper little argument. Yeah, well, I mean, this is going to have a lot of unintended consequences too. We can look at, you know, people while they were at home during COVID started buying more gaming PCs, right? Like your graphics cards are more expensive now because they were like, "Oh, I need a work PC and I want to be able to game." So like we saw an uptick in gaming, right? Like there are going to be big costs of this, and if nations
that a
aren't.
big cost? Like I'm expecting you to give me something. If that like,
that's
oh,
awesome, bro.
gaming cards, video cards.
Queue times are going to be down.
I also don't think that was the big driving factor behind that
Capitalist
shortage.
society, wouldn't that be a good thing to generate?
I think
As
there's a point.
long as you have
I
like
think
the
it would be
infrastructure and the
economy.
companies are able to keep pace, yeah, sure, it wouldn't be a good thing. But as of right now, like, yeah, it was a big deal.
I think
It
there
was
is a point that
contributing
Dustin makes.
factor.
I think there is a broader point that COVID, we saw a huge shift in terms of a decrease in demand for services and a massive uptick in demand for products. And as
Yeah,
a result, we saw a lot of that was the result of a lot of inflation early on and supply
right.
chains getting lagged behind. Is that, you know, demand for one sector of the economy dropped off a cliff and demand for
Yep.
another sector spiked. You know, that can be really
Yeah,
harmful sometimes to an
yeah,
economy.
yeah. But it's a weird example. Like a better example would have been how when the people staying at home. I'm gonna but uh that people people staying at home. There were a lot of them who were lonely, right? And so they went online. So they went to social media and they went on Facebook groups. And what did they find? They found conspiracy theories. They found that bleach is a cure-all. They found that COVID is, well, whatever, something with the Jews. I don't know, right?
Giant
They found
space
a whole
lasers.
bunch of. It's always something with the Jews.
Yeah,
But they 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 were lonely. They were looking for answers to whatever is ailing them, and they
yeah.
found it in Facebook groups, and that became a problem. Like the fact that I don't know. Again, I don't even think that's a driving factor. It's like,
Oh, it's definitely a contributing factor. Like,
Let me tell you what, Prime. That's my number
obvious,
one issue is GPU prices.
obviously,
Okay.
yeah, obviously, crypto plays a part into it too. Like, there are a bunch of
Plus
different
crypto
combining
supply chain
factors.
issues, there were factory shutdowns.
Yes,
I mean, there's a myriad of issues that
right.
kind of came together at
Yep.
the same time.
hmm And what I'm saying is, on a whole, if you're not scaled, if your production isn't going to be ready, these are two. This is like again an infrastructure capitalist problem. I am on the idea with flow as like as far and what Prime had just said. Like, yeah, there are going to be social consequences to this that if we are not ready for, if we're not addressing now, um, is going to become a you know, incredibly alienating space. But I just think people on the whole end up searching for people that they can interact with face to face, just pure on that kind of like species level, that they do gravitate towards people. Yeah. For being social creatures, right? Like humans are
Oh,
social creatures. Right. That's what I'm talking about.
um, uh, I guess finally, I'm wondering about uh, like the losses that the public is facing, right? Like, so everything has a cost. Literally everything has a cost, and this new way of interacting with each other has a cost too. But of what we are losing is actually that big of a deal for majority of individuals. Um, and this is not like this is less of a remote work thing. Remote work is being driven by like uh by workers, right? So the people who want it are the ones who are demanding it. Um, like uh to the point that I mean there were articles about like
People
CEOs,
quitting
right?
their jobs. Oh yeah.
How saying that like we're gonna get these people back to work immediately. That that people who are doing remote work were inherently slacking off. That it was selfish to want to remote work. I think a lot. First of all, a lot of those guys changed once they saw like the bottom line, how much money they were saving of remote work, and then they're like, ah, maybe not. But others are just kind of old school and just like demanded that things stay the same. Like this is the way I always walk. I put on a suit and tie, right? I take my briefcase and I go to work, right? And if you don't want to do the same thing, obviously there's something wrong with you. Again, which is where I'm afraid parts of this conversation we're going. But if there's such a demand, and there's so little uh, and there are a plethora of jobs because that's another thing. Remote. I'm like working this out in my head as I'm sorry if I'm going.
Don't worry.
Don't worry.
That's another thing because uh, remote work. This is like a white collar problem. I should have brought this up before. This is like a white collar problem, right? This isn't most people who are working blue collar jobs. Like they don't get that option, right? We saw this um, in COVID spikes, right? Who are the people getting COVID? They're the ones who were the was it the necessary workers or the
Essential
essential
workers.
workers. Thank you so much. The
Yeah.
essential workers. The essential workers were the ones spiking in COVID because they didn't have a choice, right? You saw like a lot of African Americans. One, they were in that situation because of their jobs, but also because healthcare in their area was deficient, and they got hit really hard by COVID.
You mean
Like so,
subpar?
the idea of
You said their healthcare was sufficient. I think
I
you mean
said
subpar.
insufficient. But
Oh, okay. Sorry.
maybe
Yeah.
my thing cut out because
No, that's all right. You're fine.
um
Go ahead.
yeah. So uh, I'm going on a bit of a rant. I apologize. Uh, the fact that that was the case means that there's a class divide happening, and these complaints about like these now a series of options that end up helping a wide range of people, including disabled people. It's a weird conversation, right? Like I wonder like how this would sound to like a blue collar individual, right? A grocery store attendant, or other that's the only one I can think of. Other essential workers, right? Who were like,
Yeah.
I had to go out there every single day while you were in your home, right? While you were like ordering shit off Amazon and it being delivered. I was the one delivering it to you, right? I
Right.
was being exposed to people again and again and again. And then to complain about like the benefits of remote work, it seems I'd imagine it would come off as classist. I said a
Yeah.
lot.
No doubt. No doubt.
I
It's
I
very much
mean,
kind of like a first world problem type thing.
right. Well, and not only that, like you would hope that you'd start to see some wage gains in those blue collar areas too, right? Like if we're going to start talking about how important that labor is going to be,
it need to be commensurate with that risk or that ability to actually do that instead of the manual labor of punching in keys on a keyboard. There's you would hope.
Not in this country. Like, come on now.
Well, I mean, there are
There
some
should
strong
be,
labor,
but you know,
there's
No,
some strong
there will
labor
be.
unions that are starting to get a little bit more like representation, right? Like the flight attendants union in the United States is a big contributor politically. They've got some good representation.
a lot of people in airlines still make dick, and like people work in
Mhm.
grocery stores, which there's a grocers union. The grocers union is garbage. I mean, it's absolutely terrible. I mean, there are some bad unions out there, so like
Of course.
that's an issue, that's the thing. Like, well, a lot of these larger companies will see the benefits, the underlying benefits of their gains
Right.
on these things. When are we going to learn? It's not trickling down. Come on, like it's
Well,
a
yeah.
joke. It's been a joke for 40 years. It's not happening.
I'm not trying to keep saying it. I just like you're gonna hope and have social consequences that result in like proper legislation. I look.
Wait for trickle down or wait for somebody to piss in your mouth. See which one happens first.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was really funny.
That's a good saying. I'm gonna use that.
Yeah. Uh, but I'm not sure. But, okay, so yeah, it's you guys are seem to be in agreement that there's a class divide, but how does that frame the rest of the argument for you, right? Like looking at it through that lens, looking at it through a lens. Before we've been talking about it through a lens of individuals who have a choice, right?
Sure.
But then looking at the scope of work when you don't have a choice, where uh, this is the job you're going to get, and how they tell you to interact, your work environment is how it's going to be. We live in a country where people don't have like guaranteed health insurance, and so for that reason, they don't leave their jobs,
Yeah.
right? So it's like I think that just alters how we should be interacting with this type of station.
I guess I can see I definitely can see the value of sort of taking a moment, taking a step back, and being like, look, one way or the other, white collar, like most people in white collar jobs are going to be a lot better off than most people in blue collar jobs, and I think that is valuable to have. But I'm actually I could just be missing it, but I'm not actually certain exactly how the fact that remote work is mostly a white collar phenomena would I'm not sure if that would necessarily change any of sort of my positions or any of the sort of points. I think it's important to acknowledge that this is ultimately a very sort of limited scope issue, and it's not the most important thing. Um, you know, we shouldn't be legislating the country to the benefit of exclusively white collar workers.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure if it really changes any of the sort of internal pieces.
Just
And I
quickly,
want to
and
push
just
back
quickly,
on the.
just quickly before you do that. Thank you, Redolent Thought, for the 5 hot tier 1 gift subs to the channel. Means a lot, does a lot. Thank you for being such a great supporter of this community, Redolent Thought. But
So I want to push back a little bit on the idea that it's all white collar workers. I mean, somebody that works in a call center doing collections is making fucking dick shit for money. They're not
yeah,
getting,
I was gonna say that's me if you want to talk
you
about it.
know, like they're. I wouldn't exactly put them in like a white collar position. They're not accountants, or bankers or people who are working in speculative finance or some shit like that. They're people usually on the phones fucking beating the clock, getting screamed at 24/7, their entire shift, and then getting off and having to deal with the emotional ramifications of having been told they're a piece of shit for 8 hours a day, in and out. So it is the same thing as somebody who is, say, working in a convenience store. I know because I've done both. So I'm speaking from experience. It is the same. The only difference is you don't have the tactile response. And yeah, you'd be surprised how much less people are willing to say when they're in your face as opposed to what they're willing to say to you on the phone.
Right.
Oh yeah.
But they both carry their own issues, and I think people that are interacting, that are in jobs or in places where they have to interact with the public, where there isn't a choice, or they have to go into a workplace, sure, you should be compensated for that. I'm for compensating people as soon as they fucking walk out their door to drive to work. You're not fucking like on your free time during that time. You're driving to work. You should get paid for that, Just like, if you have to go into work, you should get a stipend or extra pay for that as well. We're in a different society now, and a lot of jobs can be done from home, and those that can't should be compensated more for that work that they're doing.
I just want to throw in a quick thing. The other day, started laundry, lunch,
Very
put it in the
exciting.
dryer.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm just saying, like, it's relevant. Like, that's just time savings. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's little things like that that do save time and, like, not driving. Like, it adds up.
Oh, I mean, yeah, like if you spending for most people a third of your life, right, at work, right? So a third of your day goes there, a third of your life, overall, and then on top of that, it's getting to there. And
Yeah.
for another reason, get rid of suburbs, which is where we were before. It's like if people driving fucking
Oh,
2 hours out, it'd just be
Yeah.
better if people were there. I mean, for them personally, and then for the environment, it would just be
Right.
better if we're more
Yep.
centralized in our sitting in urban planning, right, or state planning, so that that's not an issue, and we live healthier lifestyle. Like it would just make sense.
Yeah.
Us, hello, hi, thanks for.
G'day, mate. Yeah, look, I was just on the point you were making, actually, Kays, that this income inequality, yeah, I get that not everybody who can work remotely is necessarily poor, but the overarching picture that we've got out of this pandemic has been increasing wealth inequality. And this is one of the side effects of that happening. And I wanted to talk about how that intersects with climate change, because we're increasingly seeing communities get destroyed and people have to get back on their feet time and time again. And in some ways, remote work can help with that, but only if you've made it past a certain threshold of having enough tech to be able to engage. Some of that can be done by government. Some of it can be done by corporations who hand you a computer. But to assume that's always going to be the case is probably unrealistic. So unless we put some strong social controls in, we could be pricing people out of work completely over time. And this could become a self-reinforcing cycle. So I think that there's, in addition to the inherent kind of wealth inequality that this, from a white collar perspective, it also has a feedback loop capability of allowing people who are already rich to live in places that are cheaper while forcing poor people to live in places that cost more, by allowing people who already have tech to get tech jobs while cutting people who don't have tech out of those tech jobs, and essentially just diverging these class stratifications that we're already seeing. There are a few exceptions, as was raised earlier, but by and large, we are seeing this phenomena overwhelmingly benefit those people who are rich enough to have a spare room that they could, dedicate to this, who are rich enough to have the tech and live in those places that have the stuff that Red Bearded Man was talking about, Dustin, that this is a class stratification, and it's not just about the jobs. It is also about the prerequisites and the feedback loops.
Yeah.
Someone respond to that?
I think we mostly all agree, to be honest.
Yeah.
Okay. But I guess I'll try to comment on that sort of briefly. I think yes, there's a level. There's levels to this shit, right? Like there was, someone said it previously. And it was something I wanted to comment on. That like well, remote work. I think it was Kamikaze. Yeah, it was Kamikaze before. That remote work will give the private sector a reason to build out broadband, and I hated it because it's probably true. I hated it because it's the digital divide as it stands. That so many of us like don't have access to well, not of us watching this. But, right. But
I don't know how true that would actually be. As a matter of fact, Prime, that this will
what
give
I haven't
as far as like giving private industry a reason to expand broadband. I don't know how much that's actually true.
well, okay, well
And
maybe.
that go.
Oh, let me finish my point.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. I think that that we have at least in this nation, and maybe different in others, right? That we don't realize that the internet's utility and that everyone should have access to it, and that if you don't, you are locked out of not only job opportunities but culture, right? History as it's being made. There's so much of what's happening in the world that you will literally not be able to access if you don't have this. And then, of course, yeah, it's the training, right? Your kids not being able to fully engage even in their own education because education assumes they have access to the internet, like broadband access. So where they go? They go to a McDonald's uh, parking lot to use the Wi-Fi there, which is like a huge fucking thing. In case you didn't know. So
Yep.
uh, it seems to me, and Justin is disagreeing. It seems to me that uh, this would be that the fact that there's a business demand and businesses would be complaining that their employees don't have proper broadband access would be a more of a reason for any sort of change to happen rather than the people who've been suffering for like decades now.
Yeah. Are we talking about nationalizing broadband service? Because I'm all fucking for
Fuck
that. Let's
yeah!
fucking
High
go
five, my man.
right
Well,
fucking now.
so the reason why I disagree with
Numb
you Ken,
tots, go.
is kind of what I was talking about with that concentration of economic opportunity and power, right? Because as of right now, the world that we live in, a lot of people seem to just go to a large city and they live there, and we've got like a huge rural and city divide as of right now. So that's why I like this idea of remote work, but it needs to be, in my mind, it needs to be done in consultation with governance in a way so we can start saying like, hey, there's a reason why you should go live out in rural fucking Montana, right? There are some positives out there, and we're going to ensure that the infrastructure is out there. The reason why I brought this up, as far as like me disagreeing, there doesn't seem to be a lot of benefit. And we know that private companies usually don't want to make those type of large investments because they don't see a lot of benefit because of that, right? Like there'd be no benefit. They just want to ensure that they've got the highest quality in the most concentrated area because it lessens their responsibilities and they've got to hire less people. It has to be a government move, and we've kind of see that. I think it was a huge. I think it was the American Recovery Act signed in by Biden that had, at least here in Nebraska, gave like something like $117 million to help get broadband out to rural Nebraska. Like there are big reasons that huge shifts like this have to be the groundwork at the very least has to be laid by the government because it doesn't look like the private industry is willing to take that risk.
Certainly in terms of the last mile, we just had that exact thing happen in Australia because we upgraded the entire national network to get NBN, and we'd had a left-wing government who offered to pay for it all and go do the last mile to everybody's houses, and then we had a right-wing government who came in and said no, it has to produce a profit, and so the company they put in charge of that just stopped going to rural areas. And I think that's probably what you'd see if there was an incentive to companies to roll out. The incentive would not be for high density urban areas and those who already had to the areas that had high degrees of skilled workers. So again, we would see that income disparity reinforced through that process. And large parts of the country just wouldn't be profitable for them to roll it out to, either because took too long or didn't have the people that are interested in.
Which is why it has to be a utility, because if you rely, like, is exactly why the post office is the utility, right? Delivering mail, because there's some places where delivering mail is simply not profitable. That's why FedEx and them don't go that far here in the States. Because it's not worth their time. If you left it up to them, those people would just not get mail, right? Now this is the same thing with email. This is the same thing with broadband. It's not profitable enough. Okay, well then let's put a massive investment. First of all, we'll have maybe a public option, if not straight up nationalization, like my man Jason Society wants, right? At the very least, have a public option, or like the other option is massive public investment into these private companies to build out these networks, the last mile. But we hate that the most. But yeah, that's
The worst of all worlds.
I think it's yeah, it's
Put
also
her
really
on that
important to recognize that I think it's not just also a matter of rural areas, but I think even there are a lot of like more sort of rundown suburban areas. I don't know if you guys have ever been in or heard of school districts that will try to run like Wi-Fi trucks out to like more disadvantaged communities because there will be kids who are getting assigned homework and their houses just straight up do not have any cables running there already. If you ever buy a house that previously didn't have internet, or if the line gets broken, a lot of times you have to like pay for half of that if the company's going to go and run a new line, and that can be like thousands of dollars depending upon like where you are, what the regulations are, or how far away you are. So yeah, it just seems undeniable at this point that internet is as required, if not more required, than like electricity to function like as a utility in a lot of places.
I
So
actually think that school example is a really good one because
Yeah.
it kind of gives an insight into what would happen if we forced everyone in society to go remote. Because we took an entire generation and we said, "Nah, all of you, you're now remote." And a few people did well; they got more time to do exercise, spent more time with their family. Some of the kids did okay, but overwhelmingly, we saw huge societal issues: people who were struggling with socialization, not being around other people, and we saw those who were the most disadvantaged just drop off the map completely and lose entire years of their lives and get left out of progression systems. That seems to be a fairly good indication of what we'd see if this became the norm across all society.
Um, so this is super interesting. We've been at this for over 8 hours. Thank you all for being here. Everyone who showed up. We'll be back tomorrow. We'll be on YouTube. We'll be doing some gaming. So come join us at YouTube. Right, hit that follow button. If you haven't done so yet, hit that follow button. Make sure live. But also keep track of what we're doing. Head up us on Discord. Discord has our announcements. It tells you whenever I'm going live. So if you're ever confused about that, check out Discord. And YouTube is where you'll find, well, me tomorrow. Also the VODs in case you missed it. Okay? Heads up on